Welcome to the first paradoxes, the what-if spiral. Constantly imagining worst-case scenarios that never happen, paralyzing your ability to act in the present. You think you're being careful, you're just trying to be prepared. A little planning never hurt anyone, right? But this isn't planning. This is drowning in futures that don't even exist. You're running simulations in your mind that have no ending, no reality, and no mercy. It feels like you're solving problems before they arise, but you're really just building a prison out of guesses. You believe you're preventing chaos, but you're creating it inside your own head. Here's the paradox. The more you worry about the future, the less prepared you actually become. The mind tells you it's working, that it's helping. Think it through one more time, it whispers, just in case. But every time you answer that whisper, you leave the present moment behind. You step away from where life actually is. You start stacking fears on top of fears, making mountains out of ghosts. Nothing has gone wrong yet, but your body reacts like you're under attack. And the worst part? You haven't moved. You're stuck, paralyzed by 1,000 different futures that will never arrive. It starts small. What if I mess this up? What if they say no? What if I fail? What if this hurts? What if I regret this later? Each what if feels like a necessary question, a smart question, a protective shield. But it becomes a spiral. You ask one, then another, then 5 more. You think you're being cautious, but you're actually feeding anxiety. And anxiety is greedy. It never says, that's enough. It keeps asking for more fear, more doubt, more imaginary disasters. Here's the absurd twist. None of these what-ifs help you make a decision. They don't bring clarity. They bring fog, because there's always another angle, another detail you missed, another terrible thing that might go wrong. Your mind becomes a machine for fear. It manufactures risk out of thin air, and the more creative your brain is, the worse it gets, because now it's not just reacting, it's storytelling. It's inventing tragedies with plot twists, emotional weight, and high-definition panic. You think you're staying ahead of danger, but you're falling behind life. You're losing real time worrying about fake outcomes. You hesitate to act because something might go wrong, but the real failure is in the hesitation. Life moves, with or without your consent. Opportunities don't wait around while you finish every scenario in your head. You sit on the edge of the pool asking, what if the water's too cold? While everyone else is already swimming. Ironically, the more you try to control the future, the less control you actually have. What if thinking creates a sense of control, but it's a lie. It's a form of mental gambling, making bets on disasters that may never come, and most don't. That's the brutal reality. Most of the time, the awful thing you imagined never shows up. It stays fictional, but the stress, that's real. The physical tension, the racing heart, the lost sleep, the missed chances, that's the price you pay for futures that never happened. Even worse, the spiral gets addictive. You start to trust your anxiety. You think, well, I worried about it, so I'm safer now. But are you, or have you just rehearsed 100 painful scenarios for nothing? You start to believe that worrying is productive, that it's the responsible thing to do. But responsibility isn't fear. Responsibility is action. And you're not acting, you're just thinking, and thinking, and thinking, until you've thought yourself into paralysis. And here's another paradox. Clarity doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from thinking less. At some point, the mind has to stop. It has to breathe. It has to return to now. Because now is the only place where decisions get made. Now is where you can do something. The what-if spiral tricks you into believing that more mental effort equals better outcomes. But it's not effort. It's noise. And noise doesn't solve problems. It just drowns out your inner compass. You might believe that this kind of thinking keeps you safe, but safety doesn't come from avoidance. It comes from confidence, and confidence comes from movement. You only build it by acting in spite of the what-ifs, not because they're gone, but because you've stopped giving them power, because you understand the trap. You see the illusion. You realize that trying to predict every possible outcome is a way to avoid responsibility. If you never act, you never fail. But if you never act, you also never live. Another cruel twist. The more you try to eliminate uncertainty, the more anxious you become. Life is uncertain by nature. There's no perfect decision, no path with zero risk. But the spiral tells you that if you think just a little longer, maybe you'll find the safe route, the perfect plan, the guaranteed win. You won't, because life doesn't work that way. You don't need certainty. You need courage. You need to act despite the uncertainty. That's where growth lives. And when you finally take action, when you break the spiral, you realize something wild. It was never as bad as you thought. The what-ifs made it look terrifying, but reality is quieter than fear. Things happen, sure, but you handle them. Maybe it's messy, maybe it's awkward, but it's real, it's alive, and it's yours. The spiral, on the other hand, is dead space. It's hours, days, sometimes years spent in mental rehearsal for a show that never opens. The spiral also steals joy. You can't enjoy what you have if you're afraid of losing it. You can't appreciate where you are if you're already 10 disasters down the road. It makes you forget the beauty of the present, the calm, the simplicity, the feeling of just being here, breathing, doing, living. Instead, you're bracing for impact that never comes. You're walking around with emotional armor for battles that never start. And then you look back and wonder, how much time did I lose to nothing? How many things didn't I do because I thought too much? How many people didn't I talk to? How many chances passed me by while I was too busy imagining how they might go wrong? The what-if spiral is a paradox of protection that becomes poison. You wanted safety. You ended up with fear. You wanted certainty. You found anxiety. You thought you were planning for life. You were actually hiding from it. The only way out is through, not through more thought, through choice, through movement, through action. Because every time you ask, what if, life quietly replies, what now? Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the I'll be happy when illusion. Postponing happiness to some future achievement that keeps moving further away. You think you're being ambitious. You think you're building something, that you're delaying happiness for a good reason. You tell yourself that once you reach the next goal, then you'll feel it. Then you'll finally exhale. But the strange part is, the moment you get close to it, the goal moves. It shifts, stretches, changes. The finish line becomes a starting line. And once again, happiness is just ahead, but never here. It starts innocently. A goal, a dream, a destination. I'll be happy when I get the job. Then it's, I'll be happy when I get promoted. Then it's, I'll be happy when I run my own company. Each one sounds like progress, but none of them deliver peace. Each one is a trade. You sacrifice the present in exchange for a future that refuses to arrive. You tell yourself you're climbing a ladder, but it's actually a treadmill. The scenery changes, but the emptiness stays the same. Here's the paradox. You chase happiness like it's out there somewhere, but it never is. It's not hiding in a title, or a car, or a bank account. And yet, you keep sprinting after it, like it's a finish line you just haven't reached yet. And when you do hit that goal, what do you feel? Relief. Not joy, not peace. Just a brief, shallow exhale before the next craving shows up. It's not happiness you're chasing. It's escape. Escape from the feeling that now is not enough. You think waiting for happiness makes it more valuable, like it's a reward you earn after pain, but that belief is a trap. It convinces you that struggle must come first, and joy only comes after. But if joy is always in the after, then it's never now. And now is the only place life happens. So you miss it. You miss your own life, waiting for it to be better. And here's the weirdest twist. Every time you reach a new level, your mind resets. What used to seem impossible becomes ordinary. What used to make you dream now barely moves you. You adjust, you adapt. That's what humans do, but adaptation kills the thrill. The high fades, and instead of feeling fulfilled, you feel empty again. So you set a new target, a bigger one, a brighter one that promises just a little more happiness than the last. But it's the same cycle. Over and over, each milestone becomes a moving target. It's like chasing the horizon. No matter how far you walk, it never gets closer. You think it's discipline. You think it's focus, but it's not. It's a form of emotional delay. You're postponing peace. You're locking joy in a box labeled later. But later never arrives, because even when the moment comes, your mind is already asking, what's next? Another paradox: the more you chase happiness, the more anxious you become, because now your peace depends on conditions being met. You've built a rule. I can't feel good until I achieve this. That rule becomes a prison, because life doesn't always cooperate. Plans fall apart, goals take longer, some things don't happen at all. So what then? Does your happiness vanish with them? If your joy is always tied to a result, then it's always at risk. You think you're building a better life, but you're missing the one you already have. You're so focused on then that you forget now. The sunset outside your window, the way your coffee smells in the morning, the small laugh with someone you love. These don't wait for success. They're already here. But you don't notice because you're too busy measuring progress. You treat the present like an obstacle course, something to push through to get to the good part. But what if this is the good part? That's the twist. What if happiness isn't at the end of the path, but in the steps themselves? What if the journey wasn't a means to joy, but the joy itself? We've been taught to delay feelings for outcomes. We say things like, I can't relax until this is done. But once it's done, something else takes its place. The list never ends. The chase never stops. And here's something even more paradoxical. When you stop needing happiness to come from achievement, you become more peaceful, more calm, more focused, and ironically, more effective, because now you're not desperate. You're not forcing. You're not frantic. You're doing the work because you love the work, not because you need it to prove something. That kind of presence is powerful. It makes space for real growth, not just external success, but internal alignment. You might fear that if you stop chasing, you'll lose your edge, that if you feel content now, you won't stay hungry. But contentment isn't the enemy of ambition, it's the fuel. You do better work when you're not desperate for a result. You think clearer when you're not gripping the future so tightly. You become creative again, curious again, alive again. And the final paradox is this: happiness isn't something you earn, it's something you choose. It's not a prize at the top of the mountain. It's in how you climb, in how you breathe while you climb, in the laughs you share along the way, in the quiet moments between big ones. If you can't find joy in the small things now, you won't find it in the big things later, because the mind that always says, not yet, will never say, enough. The illusion is convincing. It tells you that success equals peace. But peace isn't loud. It doesn't wear medals. It doesn't shout from stages. It lives in the stillness of a moment fully felt, a walk with no destination, a task done with care, a breath that reminds you, this is it, this is life. You don't need to postpone joy. You don't need to wait for the next thing. You don't need to delay your own peace like it's a dessert you haven't earned yet. You are already enough. You are already here. The question is not, when will I be happy? The real question is, why not now? Welcome to the next paradox. This one is overthinking every interaction, replaying conversations in your head, analyzing every word as if it were a life or death puzzle. You just wanted to say the right thing. That's all. You wanted to be clear, to be kind, to be understood. But now it's 3 hours later, and the conversation is still echoing in your head like it never ended. You've gone over every pause, every word, every tone shift. You're not even sure what you said anymore, just what you think you said, and what they might have heard, and what they could have meant. You're trying to find certainty in something that already happened. Here's the paradox. You overthink to feel in control, but it makes you feel less certain. You're replaying it to find clarity, but all it brings is confusion. You thought revisiting the moment would give you peace, but it just builds tension. You believe you're solving something, fixing a mistake or preventing one in the future, but there's nothing left to fix. The conversation is over. The words are gone. You're not remembering it. You're rewriting it with fear. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just being yourself. But now you're questioning if that self was good enough. You analyze a laugh. Was it genuine? You examine a pause. Was it awkward? You wonder if they misread you, or worse, saw too much of you. The overthinking doesn't come from ego. It comes from care, from wanting to connect, but it ends in disconnect, from others, from the moment, and from yourself. You think you're being careful, thoughtful, emotionally intelligent, but there's a line between awareness and obsession, and when you cross it, the mind turns against you. It loops the past like a broken recording, and every time you press play again, you hope the ending changes. That maybe this time you'll hear it differently, that this time it won't sting, but it always stings because you're listening with judgment, not memory. You thought the danger was in saying the wrong thing, but the real danger is in never letting go of what's already been said. The moment passes, but you stay stuck inside it. You walk away from the person, but you keep the interaction with you, carrying it like a heavy bag you don't need. It's done, but not for you. For you, it's still alive, still twisting into something worse than it probably was. Here's the strangest twist. The more you think about it, the less accurate your memory becomes. You're not replaying the moment, you're reimagining it, coloring it with insecurity, adding shadows where there were none. You think you're reviewing facts, but you're actually inventing fiction. And you believe the story even though it hurts, even though there's no proof, even though the other person has already forgotten what you're still stuck on. The irony is sharp. You want to connect more deeply, yet overthinking pulls you away from real connection. It makes you self-centered, not out of vanity, but out of worry. Every look, every comment, every silence becomes about you. Did I say too much? Did I say too little? Did they think I was weird? Was I too intense, too quiet, too eager? And while your brain runs its diagnostics, life keeps moving. People move on. Conversations end. But you're still trapped in the analysis. And the deeper paradox? The more you care about being understood, the less you speak freely. You filter every word, edit every sentence before it leaves your mouth. You try to control how you're seen, and in doing so, you become less yourself. You shrink. You hesitate. You start to treat every interaction like a performance, one where the audience is always judging, always remembering, always waiting for you to mess up. But that audience lives only in your head. You imagine their thoughts, their judgments, their reactions, but you're not reading minds. You're projecting your fears. You assume the worst, that they saw the worst in you, that they caught your every flaw. But people aren't watching you that closely. Most of the time, they're too busy overthinking themselves. We're all spinning in our own heads, thinking the spotlight is on us, but the stage is empty. There's no audience, just mirrors. And another paradox, by replaying every interaction, you become afraid of the next one. You carry the weight of all your imagined mistakes into future conversations. You walk in already guarded, already nervous, already bracing for impact. And that tension, people feel it. It makes everything harder. Your words get tighter. Your smile gets smaller. You want to connect, but fear has already closed the door. You think reviewing the past will prepare you for the future, but it doesn't. It makes you doubt your instincts. It trains you to second guess, and second guessing kills authenticity. People don't connect to perfect words. They connect to presence, to warmth, to realness. And realness can't exist in overanalysis. It's not crafted, it's lived. You don't need to dissect every interaction to grow. Growth comes from reflection, not rumination. One is gentle, curious, open. The other is harsh, judgmental, heavy. You're not improving yourself when you punish yourself over conversations. You're not learning when you're blaming. Growth asks, what can I do next time? Overthinking asks, what did I do wrong? One frees you, the other traps you. And here's the most surprising part. Most of the things you worry about, others don't even notice. That thing you regret saying, they forgot. That awkward pause, it didn't register. That joke you wish you hadn't made, it wasn't as big as it feels in your mind. The truth is, most conversations are not remembered word for word. They're remembered by feeling. And if you came with kindness, with openness, with real energy, that's what stays. You're trying so hard to be perfect, but people connect through imperfection. Through laughter, mistakes, shared humanity. You don't need to script your life to be liked. You just need to show up, breathe, speak, and then let it go. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the endless comparison loop, measuring your worth against others, never feeling good enough no matter how far you've come. You just wanted to know how you were doing. That's all. You looked around for a little perspective, to see where you stood, to feel motivated, to feel inspired, but instead, you felt smaller. Someone else was further. Someone else was faster. Someone else was louder, stronger, better. You thought comparison would guide you, but it only made you doubt yourself. You don't even remember when it started. Maybe it was subtle, a glimpse at someone's life, their progress, their success. You told yourself it didn't matter. But it did. Something shifted. Suddenly, what you were proud of yesterday feels like not enough today, because now you've seen what someone else has, what they've done, what they've become, and now your joy has been replaced with a quiet sense of failure, even if nothing in your life changed. Here's the paradox. You measure yourself to feel confident, but the act of measuring strips that confidence away. The moment you compare, you become less of yourself. You turn your life into a scoreboard. And no matter how many points you earn, someone always has more. So even if you improve, it doesn't feel like progress. It feels like falling behind. You thought comparison would push you to grow, but instead, it stunts you, because now your growth isn't yours. It's borrowed. It's shaped by someone else's path. And if their path is different, your progress feels meaningless. You no longer ask, am I becoming who I want to be? You ask, am I catching up to them? And that question never leads to peace. Even worse, the standards keep changing. Every time you reach one, a new one appears. You run faster, climb higher, work harder, but the target keeps moving. Someone else is always doing more, achieving more, becoming more. You feel like you're chasing shadows, and shadows, no matter how fast you run, can't be caught. And here's where it turns absurd. The people you compare yourself to are often comparing themselves to someone else. They don't feel good enough either. So now you're basing your self-worth on someone else's performance, and they're doing the same. Everyone is looking sideways, and no one feels grounded. Everyone is chasing, but no one feels like they've arrived. You think comparison gives you motivation, but real motivation doesn't come from envy. It comes from meaning. It comes from alignment with your own values, your own direction. But comparison hijacks that. It distracts you from your own path and throws you into someone else's race. A race with rules you didn't choose. A race you can't win because the finish line keeps changing. You thought you were seeking excellence, but you're actually feeding insecurity. You don't admire others to grow. You compare yourself to shrink, and the more you do it, the smaller you feel. You stop seeing your own wins. You forget how far you've come. Your focus zooms in on what you lack, and everything else fades. Even success starts to lose its flavor. You reach a goal, but instead of celebrating, you look around. Someone else did it faster. Someone else did it younger. Someone else got more attention. So what was once a victory now feels like a failure, not because you failed, but because someone else didn't. And here's the cruel twist. Even if you become the best, it won't be enough. Because now, your worth depends on staying at the top. You fear being replaced. You fear losing ground. So the pressure grows. You don't feel proud. You feel paranoid. You don't feel secure. You feel watched. The higher you climb, the more fragile you become. Because your value isn't built on who you are. It's built on where you stand in relation to others. Comparison also hides the truth. You only see their highlight reel, their perfect angles, their curated moments. You don't see the struggle, the pain, the confusion, but you compare your full life, your messy, raw, real life, to their filtered surface. And you believe it. You believe they have it better, that they figured it out, that you're behind. But behind what? A fantasy? And here's another paradox. The more you compare, the less connected you feel. Instead of seeing people as fellow humans, you see them as benchmarks. You stop relating. You start competing. And competition kills connection. It turns potential friends into rivals. It turns shared experience into silent judgment. You smile at them, but secretly, you're measuring, and you assume they're doing the same. You didn't mean to turn life into a race, but now every achievement feels like a contest. Every moment becomes a test. And instead of asking what makes you feel alive, you ask what will make you look successful. You change your path, not because it feels right, but because it looks impressive. You chase validation instead of meaning. The saddest part? You don't even realize what you've lost. While you're busy measuring your worth against others, you miss the beauty of your own story. You forget how unique your path is. You ignore the quiet moments of growth, the personal victories, the small joys, all invisible to comparison, all priceless. And yet, you keep looking, scrolling, watching, measuring, and the more you do, the more empty you feel. Not because you aren't enough, but because you've tied your enoughness to things outside of you, things you can't control, things that were never meant to define you. But the paradox always breaks when you return to yourself, when you stop asking, "Am I better than them?" and start asking, "Am I becoming who I want to be?" That's where peace lives. That's where truth begins. Inward, not outward. Because there's only one person you can truly become, and it's not them. It's you. You don't have to win at life, you just have to live it. On your terms, at your pace, in your way. The loop only breaks when you realize the measuring stick was never real. That worth isn't earned by comparison, it's owned by being real, being kind, being present. You thought comparing would help you improve, but it only made you forget who you are. And the moment you remember, really remember, is the moment the loop ends. Welcome to the next paradox, This one is assuming everyone thinks like you, expecting others to have the same values, emotions, or logic, and feeling betrayed when they don't. You try to be a good person, you think things through, you treat people how you want to be treated, you speak with care, you show up, you stay loyal, and you assume others will do the same. That seems fair, that seems right, but then they don't, and you're left confused, hurt, wondering how someone could act like that, say that, ignore that, when you never would. You think something must be broken, either in them or in you, because if it were you in their position, the choice would be obvious, but it wasn't obvious to them. Here's the paradox. You believe that seeing the world through your lens will help you understand it better, but it only blinds you to how others actually see it. You think you're building bridges by imagining others feel the same, but those bridges collapse the moment someone acts outside your rules. You expected sameness and got difference. You wanted alignment and got confusion. And instead of adapting, you feel betrayed. Not because they were wrong, but because they weren't you. It happens in silence. You assume someone will respond the way you would. You expect them to notice what you notice, care about what you care about, prioritize the things that matter to you, but they don't. And you take it personally, not because of what they did, but because you can't imagine doing it yourself. The pain isn't just from the action, it's from the gap between your logic and theirs, between your emotional map and their response to it. You think your values are universal, you think your emotional reactions are natural, your reasoning is common sense. But what you call normal is just familiar, and what's familiar to you might be foreign to someone else. You say, "I would never do that," as if that settles it. But someone else already did. So now what? You either accept that they're wired differently, or you keep trying to rewrite reality so it matches your reflection. But it gets worse. You don't just expect people to act like you. You expect them to read your mind, to feel what you feel without being told. You think, if I were in their shoes, I'd know exactly what to say. So when they miss it, when they say the wrong thing or nothing at all, you don't just feel disappointed, you feel unseen, misunderstood, abandoned, because their lack of reaction feels like a lack of care. But they might not even know there was something to notice. And here's the strange part. Assuming sameness feels kind at first. It feels empathetic. You're putting yourself in their position. But you're not putting yourself in their life. You're putting yourself, with your thoughts and values, in a situation they're experiencing through their thoughts and values. You're not stepping into their shoes. You're stepping into their shoes while still wearing your own, and then wondering why they don't fit. The more you expect others to mirror your inner world, the more disconnected you feel when they don't. It turns difference into disappointment. You don't see people as they are. You see them as they fail to be like you. And that judgment doesn't just distance you from them. It isolates you inside your own thinking. You try to relate, but end up resenting. Not because they hurt you, but because they didn't do what you would have done. Another paradox, the more you try to be understood, the less you understand others. You focus so hard on being mirrored that you forget to be curious. You don't ask why they did what they did. You just assume they should have known better, that they should have cared more, but maybe they were showing care in a different way, one you didn't recognize, one that didn't look like yours, so you dismissed it. You thought you were building connection, but you were building expectations. Quiet ones, invisible ones. Ones you didn't speak out loud because you assumed they were obvious. And when people failed to meet them, it felt like rejection, but they weren't rejecting you. They just didn't know the script you were working from. The irony is sharp. You want to feel close, so you expect sameness, but true closeness comes from respecting difference, from recognizing that other people have a completely different emotional language, different fears, different needs, different ways of showing love, handling stress, making decisions. And that doesn't make them wrong. It just makes them real. But we don't like that. We want people to react our way because that feels safe, predictable, comfortable. It gives us a sense of control. If everyone thought like us, we'd never be surprised, never be confused, never be hurt, but also never be truly known. Because knowing someone deeply means seeing them fully, including the parts that make no sense to you, especially those. And here's the painful twist. When people do think like you often don't notice. It feels normal, expected, invisible. But when they don't, it stands out. It irritates. It feels like betrayal. So your mind creates a bias. People are always letting you down, when really, many aren't. They're just different. They're not broken. They're just not you. You think assuming sameness makes relationships easier, but it actually adds pressure. You end up disappointed when they don't predict your needs. You feel unloved when they don't match your emotions. You want connection, but your conditions keep blocking it. Because you're not relating to the person in front of you. You're relating to a version of them built in your own image. And yet, this all starts from a good place, from wanting to connect, from wanting to be seen, from wanting to believe we're not so alone in how we think, feel, move through the world. But the path to connection isn't through assumption. It's through acceptance, through letting people be different without labeling them as wrong. The final paradox: the more you let go of expecting people to be like you, the closer you get to real understanding. You stop demanding familiarity. You start welcoming honesty. You get less control, but more clarity. You lose the comfort of sameness, but gain the richness of truth. Because when you stop assuming everyone thinks like you stop being disappointed by who they're not, and finally begin appreciating who they actually are. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the productivity guilt trap. Feeling worthless if you're not constantly working or achieving something measurable. You wake up, and before you've even stretched, your mind is already asking, what can I do today? What can I finish? What can I prove? Rest feels like a waste. Stillness feels dangerous. If there's no progress, then something must be wrong. You believe that your value is tied to your output, that every moment not used for doing is a moment lost. And so you move, you push, you perform, but the more you do, the more you feel behind. Here's the paradox. The harder you work to feel worthy, the more worthless you feel when you're not working. You think productivity will give you peace, but it keeps you restless. You believe that constant effort will eventually buy you rest. But when the moment comes to rest, you can't take it, because now rest feels like failure, like laziness, like weakness. The very thing you thought you were working toward now makes you feel guilty. You finish one task, and instead of feeling proud, you feel pressure. There's always more to do. Another email, another list, another project. The day ends, and you don't ask, did I live? You ask, did I do enough? And no matter how much you did, the answer always leans toward no. Because enough keeps shifting. You thought productivity would give you freedom, but it's become a cage, one with invisible bars made of expectation. And here's where it gets twisted. Even your time off has to be earned. You don't relax because it's healthy. You relax only after you've squeezed every last drop out of yourself. Rest is no longer a right. It's a reward. And even then, it comes with strings attached. You check your phone. You glance at your to-do list. You wonder if you could be doing more. The guilt hums quietly beneath every slow moment. You tell yourself this is ambition, that you're chasing excellence, that you just have a strong work ethic. But beneath it all is fear. Fear that if you stop, you'll fall behind, that if you slow down, people will forget you. that your worth depends on what you produce, not who you are. So you stay busy, not because it makes you happy, but because it makes you feel safe. And yet, you never truly feel safe, just exhausted. And here's the cruel joke. The more productive you become, the more productivity is expected of you. You set a high standard, and then you become trapped by it. You can't drop below it without feeling like you're failing. So you raise the bar again. You do more, achieve more, push more. But instead of building confidence, it builds pressure. The higher you climb, the heavier the weight becomes. You thought success would feel like a rival, but it doesn't. It just creates a new mountain. And because your self-worth is tied to achievement, you can't enjoy the view. You're already scanning for the next goal. And when you're not achieving, you feel invisible, like you're fading, like you're wasting time. But the truth is, time isn't only meant to be used, it's meant to be lived. And you can't live when you're always proving. Even worse, you start comparing your productivity to others. You see someone posting about their achievements, and suddenly your own progress feels small. You wonder how they're doing so much and why you're not. You forget that people only show the highlights. You forget that speed is not the same as depth. But comparison makes you panic, so you double down. You fill your calendar, you push through burnout, you keep proving, even when no one's asking you to. And here's the strangest twist. The guilt shows up even when you're doing nothing wrong. You try to rest, and your brain whispers, you're falling behind. You take a walk, and it says, you should be working. You sit in silence, and it calls you lazy. The guilt isn't connected to reality. It's connected to identity. It's no longer about what you're doing. It's about who you believe you are when you're not doing anything. You're not chasing joy. You're chasing permission, the permission to feel okay, to feel valid, to feel enough. But that permission always comes with conditions. It says, do more, then you can rest. Win more, then you can slow down. But the more you obey that rule, the more it owns you. Because the finish line keeps moving. The moment you arrive, it vanishes. And so you keep running, even when your legs give out. You think the cure is to become even more productive, to organize better, to optimize harder, but that's not the solution. That's the trap. You're trying to calm the storm by sailing deeper into it, and it never ends, because no amount of productivity can satisfy a mind that believes it's only valuable when it's busy. But here's the breaking point. When you burn out, you don't just feel tired. You feel empty, lost, like you don't know who you are without the work. And that's the deepest paradox of all. By chasing your worth through doing, you lose touch with your being. You become a machine, but forget you're a person, a human, not a project. Someone who deserves rest, not as a prize, but as a basic truth. And yet, the guilt is strong. It whispers that stopping is dangerous, that pausing means failure, that slowing down means giving up. But none of that is true. Rest is not quitting. Rest is what keeps you human. It's what restores the part of you that work can't reach, the part that feels, dreams, laughs, breathes, the part that lives. You don't need to earn your worth. You already have it. It's not measured in output, not stored in achievements, not tied to how much you do in a day. It's found in how fully you can just be, without guilt, without pressure, without performance. You thought doing more would make you feel complete, but the feeling of enough was never in the doing. It was always in the being. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the "I always fail" narrative, using past mistakes to predict future outcomes, convincing yourself success isn't for you. You tried. It didn't work. Maybe more than once. Maybe it felt like a pattern. A door closed, a plan collapsed, a dream got smaller. So now, before you even begin, your mind tells you how the story ends. It says, don't bother. It says, You already know how this goes. You start to treat your history like a prophecy, and instead of trying again, you protect yourself from trying at all. Here's the paradox. You tell yourself you're being realistic, but you're actually building fiction. You call it truth, but it's just fear with a long memory. Yes, you failed before. That happened. But now, you act like that one outcome defines all future outcomes. Like the past wasn't just a chapter, but the entire book. You're not avoiding failure. You're rehearsing it in advance, so when it happens again, it'll hurt less. But it always hurts, even when you expect it. You think you're saving yourself from disappointment, but you're locking yourself in it. You say things like, "I always mess this up," or "This never works out for me." And it sounds honest, but it's not. It's repetition pretending to be truth. Because if you zoom out, it's not always. It's not never. But your brain filters the evidence. It keeps the bad and discards the rest. And the more times you say it, the more you believe it. It becomes your script. And you keep reading it, even when the scene has changed. You thought giving up early would hurt less than trying and failing again. But the real pain isn't in failure. It's in silence. It's in the part of you that still wants to try, but isn't allowed to. That quiet voice you keep ignoring because your louder voice already made up its mind. You think you're avoiding heartbreak, but you're creating one, slowly, every time you don't show up for yourself. You tell yourself success is for other people. People who got lucky. People who were born with something you don't have. And the more you say it, the more true it feels. But feeling true doesn't make it real. You're not seeing what others have. You're seeing what you think you lack. And then you wear that like an identity, like a label you never signed up for, but now you carry everywhere. You think that your past is your limit, but the past is only the starting line. Not a prison, not a prophecy, just proof that you've lived, that you've tried, that you've learned. You call those things failures, but they were actually attempts. And attempts are steps. Even the broken ones move you forward, if you let them. But you don't. You stand still, staring backward, and wonder why you never get anywhere. Here's the cruel twist. When you believe you always fail, you start making sure it's true. You sabotage without realizing it. You pull back right when you need to push forward. You don't give your full effort, because deep down, you believe it won't matter. And then when it doesn't work, you say, "See, I knew it." You use your own hesitation as proof that you were right, but it wasn't fate, it was fear. And yet, even when something goes well, you discount it. You say it was luck, a fluke, an exception. You never give yourself credit, because your story has already been written in your mind, and success doesn't fit in the plot. So, you rewrite even the good things to fit the narrative. You keep yourself small, not because the world asked you to, but because your past whispered that you should be. You thought remembering your failures would keep you humble. But it doesn't keep you grounded. It keeps you buried. You carry the weight of old mistakes like they define you. But mistakes are moments, not identities. They're meant to teach, not trap. You can hold a lesson without holding the pain, but you keep reopening old wounds just to remind yourself why you don't deserve more. And the more you live by that belief, the less you try. And the less you try, the more your life looks like failure, not because it's destined, but because it's been abandoned. You're not failing anymore. You're just not moving. You're not falling. You're stuck. And that stillness feels safe, but it's costing you everything you want. You want proof that you can succeed, but the only way to get that proof is to do the thing you've convinced yourself you can't do. That's the trap. You wait for confidence, but confidence only comes after action. You wait to feel ready, but readiness is built through motion. You say, "I'll try again when I believe in myself." But belief doesn't come first. The leap does. And here's the most painful irony. You're not even afraid of failing again. You're afraid of hoping, because hope feels fragile, delicate, and if it breaks, it hurts in a way failure never does. Because failure without hope is just routine. But failure after belief, that's personal. So you shut it down before it starts. You kill hope before it has a chance to grow. But that's the paradox breaking you. The story of "I always fail" only stays alive if you keep writing it the same way. And you don't have to. You can change the script, not with magic, not with sudden confidence, just with action. One small risk, one honest try, one moment where you show up even if your brain screams that it's pointless. Because maybe this time is different. Maybe not in results, but in how you show up. Maybe you give yourself permission to try without promising a perfect ending. Maybe you let yourself be new, even after all the old attempts. Maybe you let go of always and never and just do the next thing with full heart and zero guarantees. You've been punishing yourself for not winning. But life isn't about winning. It's about participating, about trying again, about stepping into the unknown without dragging all your old defeats with you. You're not the person who failed years ago. You've changed, grown, and maybe, just maybe, this version of you is ready. The story doesn't have to be "I always fail." It can be "I'm still learning," or "I'm still moving," or "I'm not done yet." Because the second you stop treating the past as your forecast, everything becomes possible again. Not perfect, not guaranteed, but open. And that's all you ever needed, a future that wasn't already decided by your past. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the sunk cost fallacy. Staying in bad situations just because you've already invested time, money, or energy. You want it to work. You want to believe it wasn't for nothing, that the effort meant something, that the time you spent is building towards something real. You look at all you've given, all you've done, all you've sacrificed, and you tell yourself, "I can't just walk away now." But here's where it turns backward. The more you give, the more trapped you feel, not because it's working, but because it isn't, and you're still there. Here's the paradox. You stay because you've already stayed. You continue because you've already continued. You tell yourself you're making progress, but really, you're refusing to lose. You're not building anymore. You're defending your past decisions, and that defense becomes your prison. The logic is strange. It says, "I've wasted so much already, so I have to keep going." But if something is broken, giving it more time doesn't fix it. It just wastes more of it. You think quitting would mean failure, but sometimes staying means something worse. It means choosing misery out of habit. It means pouring more into a hole that can't be filled. You're not moving forward. You're just trying to make your past feel justified. But the past doesn't get better because you keep dragging it with you. It just gets heavier. You thought commitment meant loyalty, but now loyalty is costing you your peace, your time, your sanity. You're holding on to something that no longer holds you. And it hurts, not just the situation, but the guilt of leaving it. You feel like walking away erases everything you've already done. But staying doesn't honor that effort either. It just adds more pain on top of it. You tell yourself, maybe it'll change. Maybe tomorrow will be better. But the truth is, you don't really believe that anymore. You're not hoping. You're bargaining. You're trying to convince yourself that staying will one day feel worth it. But deep down, you already know. You just don't want to admit it. Because admitting it means facing the loss. And loss is scary, especially when it feels like your identity is tied to what you've given. And here's where it cuts deeper. Sometimes you stay not because you want to, but because you're afraid of what leaving would say about you. You think it makes you weak, or careless, or ungrateful. You think people will judge you, Or worse, you'll judge yourself. You'll call it quitting. But quitting something that's slowly destroying you isn't weakness. It's wisdom. You thought staying was brave, but sometimes bravery is letting go, not because it's easy, but because it's honest, because it's finally telling yourself the truth, that time invested doesn't mean time well spent, that effort spent doesn't mean the outcome is guaranteed, that love given doesn't mean it will be returned. Sometimes you gave your best, and it still wasn't enough to make it right, and that's not your fault. But your brain fights back. It replays every late night, every choice, every piece of you that went into this. It says, but I tried. It says, but I gave so much. And it's true, you did. But the truth has nothing to do with what comes next, because the past is over. What matters now is where you're standing, and whether staying here keeps costing you more than it's worth. You think leaving wastes your investment, but staying costs more than you realize. It costs future time, future peace, future chances. You think of the hours you've spent, but not the hours you'll continue to lose. You focus on what's already gone, not what you still have left to protect. You worry about sunk costs, but forget you're still sinking. And the more you try to justify it, the more exhausted you become. You keep building reasons. You defend decisions you no longer believe in. You tell the story over and over, trying to make it sound like it makes sense. But no matter how many words you use, the feeling remains. Something isn't right, and you know it. You thought endings meant failure, but sometimes endings are freedom, and there's no clean exit, no perfect moment where everything lines up. Sometimes the only sign you get is the voice in your head saying, you can't keep doing this. That's it. That's enough. You don't need a dramatic reason. You don't need everyone to understand. You just need to know that your life still belongs to you. The strangest twist, when you finally do walk away, you don't feel relief right away. You feel grief. You feel guilt. Because the story didn't end the way you wanted. You wanted it to be a win. But now, it just feels like a question mark. And that's okay. Not all endings come with clarity. Some just come with space, and space is where healing begins. You don't have to erase the effort. You don't have to regret the time. You can honor what you gave without forcing it to mean more than it did. You can let it be what it was, a chapter, a try, a season, and still walk away with your head up. You gave what you had. You stayed as long as it made sense. But now you choose you. Because here's the final paradox. Leaving something that no longer serves you is not giving up. It's waking up. And sometimes waking up hurts, but it's real. And real is what you need now. Not promises, not pressure, not guilt. Just the truth. And the truth is, your time is still valuable. Your energy is still sacred. And it's never too late to stop investing in what's already gone. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is seeking closure from people who can't give it, waiting endlessly for validation, apologies, or understanding that will never come. You want peace. That's all. You just want to know why. You want to understand what happened. You want the other person to see what they did, to hear how it hurt, to explain their side, to make things make sense. You want it wrapped up. You want a moment that feels like the end, but it never comes. And the more you wait for it, the more lost you feel. Not because they owe it to you, but because your heart built a future around that moment. And now you can't stop looking for it. Here's the paradox. You wait for closure to move on, but waiting keeps you stuck. You think closure will set you free, but the longer you chase it, the more power it has over you. You put your healing in someone else's hands, and those hands aren't even reaching back. You think you're searching for truth, but you're actually holding on to pain disguised as hope. You thought if they just explained, it would ease the ache. If they said sorry, it would close the loop. But even if they spoke, it wouldn't erase what happened. It wouldn't undo the silence, the betrayal, the confusion. The wound is real, and even their words, if they came, wouldn't make it go away. But you wait anyway, because the mind loves a finish line, even if it's imaginary. You start to believe that healing depends on them, on what they say or don't say, on whether they come back and give you the moment you've been replaying in your head. You give them the final word, even in their absence, and in doing so, you put your peace in their hands, the very hands that hurt you. And that's the twist. You're asking for healing from the same place the pain came from. You think they should understand that if they knew how much it affected you, they'd do something. But maybe they already know. Maybe they don't care. Or maybe they care in a way that doesn't look like what you hoped. Maybe they don't have the words. Maybe they're just not capable of giving you what you're waiting for. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they don't have it to give. And yet, you keep checking. Your thoughts keep circling. You imagine what you'd say if you had the chance. You imagine what they'd say back. You build entire conversations in your head that never happen. And every time they don't show up, in words, in action, in understanding, the pain deepens, not from their silence, but from your expectation. You're not wrong for wanting closure. It's a human thing. We all want the ending to make sense. We all want someone to look us in the eye and say, "Yes, I see you, I hear you, you mattered." But some people will never say that. Some people will leave you with a sentence half-spoken, with questions unanswered, with space where there should have been clarity. And if you keep waiting for them to finish it, you'll miss your own chance to heal. You think closure has to come from them, but sometimes closure is accepting that it won't. It's giving yourself the explanation they never did. It's realizing that you already know what happened. You were there. You felt it. You lived it. You don't need them to rewrite it with better words. You need to stop rereading it, hoping the meaning will change. And here's the hardest part. Sometimes closure is not a clean cut. It's not a conversation. It's not a mutual understanding. It's a decision, a silent one, a moment where you finally stop waiting. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started choosing yourself. You stop standing by the door hoping it opens. You stop rehearsing the perfect response. You stop looking back for something that isn't coming. You thought their apology would give you power, that being understood would make it easier to move on. But real power doesn't come from being given something. It comes from walking away without it, from closing your own door, from realizing that closure isn't something you wait for. It's something you create. You keep thinking, if they just acknowledged it, then I'd feel better. But maybe you wouldn't. Maybe they'd say something shallow or cold or confusing. And then you'd be hurt all over again. But now with new words to spin in your mind, you're not waiting for healing. You're waiting for a version of them that may never exist. You believed closure meant understanding. But sometimes it means accepting the lack of it. Sometimes it means not knowing why, not knowing what they felt, not knowing what they meant. Sometimes it means learning to live with the blank space and still moving forward. And the strangest twist, once you stop needing closure from them, you finally start finding it within yourself, in your own clarity, in your own truth, in your ability to say, "This hurt, this mattered, but I'm still here." And that's enough. Not perfect, not clean, but enough. You thought letting go would feel like losing, but holding on was the real loss. Losing time, losing peace, losing sleep, reaching out in your mind to someone who isn't reaching back. The longer you do it, the less whole you feel. Not because of them, but because you forgot your healing was never supposed to depend on their voice. And here's the final paradox. Once you stop needing closure from them, You become free of the very thing you thought you needed to be free. You stop being defined by their silence. You stop being shaped by their absence. You stop waiting and you start living. And in that living, the past starts to loosen. It doesn't disappear, but it loses its grip. You don't need an apology to heal. You don't need their words to rewrite your worth. You don't need understanding to move forward. You only need this one moment, the one where you finally stop searching for what they'll never give and start giving yourself the one thing that's always been missing, permission to let it end. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is romanticizing the past, believing everything was better back then, and letting nostalgia distort your current reality. It sneaks in gently, a memory, a moment, a song. You think back to how things used to be, and suddenly everything feels warmer, simpler, easier. You say, those were the good times. You miss the people, the places, the feelings. You think life made more sense back then. You hold it in your mind like a treasure, but the more you hold it, the more the present slips through your fingers. Not because today is worse, but because you're not really here anymore. Here's the paradox. The more you idealize the past, the less you live in the present. You think you're remembering, but you're rewriting. You turn old pain into poetry and old chaos into calm. You smooth out the rough edges. You edit the hard parts. You keep the laughter and forget the fear. And then you compare that carefully filtered version of back then to the raw, unfiltered reality of now, and now always loses. You think it's honesty, but it's nostalgia. It doesn't play fair. It gives the past a glow the present can't compete with. It turns ordinary days into golden ones. It gives meaning to things that once felt meaningless. You forget how uncertain you felt, how lost you were, how much you wished back then for exactly what you have now. But now doesn't feel enough. Not because it isn't, but because it's being judged by a memory that's been airbrushed by time. You say, I was happier then. But were you? Or are you just forgetting the details that didn't fit the story? You remember the feeling of freedom, but not the confusion. You remember the love, but not the loneliness. You remember the light, but not the weight you carried. And the mind, hungry for comfort, turns that selective memory into a truth you start to believe, that the best has already happened, that the future can't compete, that everything after is just a slow fade. You thought you were honoring your past, but you're actually using it to escape your present. You romanticize what was so you don't have to face what is. Because the present is uncertain. It asks you to be here, to feel things deeply, to grow in real time. But the past, it's done, safe, static. You know how that story ends. So it becomes your shelter, even if it was once your storm. And here's the strange twist. You didn't even enjoy it that much while it was happening. You were too busy worrying, planning, doubting. But now, from a distance, it looks perfect. Because you survived it. And survival gives everything a shine. You're not remembering the past, you're forgiving it. And because it's over, it feels peaceful. But that peace wasn't there while you were living it. It only arrived after. You thought holding on to the past would keep you grounded. But it lifts you out of the present and plants you in a time that doesn't exist anymore. And the more you visit it, the less connected you feel to where you are. You can't build a life now if you're still emotionally living back then. You can't find peace now if you believe the best part of your life is already over. You keep looking back because the past feels familiar, predictable. You know who you were, you know what happened. But now is full of unknowns. So you retreat. You play the old tapes. You go back to the same moments, the same people, even the same regrets. Not because they're better, but because they're yours. And even your old pain feels safer than your current questions. You think you're remembering with love, but sometimes you're remembering with longing, and longing can blind you. It makes you crave something that's no longer real, something that was never quite as perfect as you remember. You say you miss those days, but maybe you miss who you were back then, or who you thought you were. Maybe you miss the version of yourself that hadn't yet been broken, but you've grown. And growth feels like loss when it means leaving that version behind. You think the past holds answers, but often it holds illusions. You ask, what if I could go back? But even if you could, you wouldn't feel the same, because you've changed. And no matter how much you miss it, you can't return to a moment and be the same person you were when you first lived it. The past isn't a place, it's a memory, and memories move with you. They aren't meant to be homes, they're meant to be signs, reminders, not destinations. And here's the most painful paradox. The more you cling to the beauty of the past, the more beauty you miss in the present. You overlook the quiet good in front of you, the people who stayed, the new things being built, the life you're still allowed to shape. You keep staring at the door that's closed, and you miss the one that's open. You miss the chance to make now a memory worth loving later. The past wasn't better. It was different. It had its magic, yes, but it had its mess too, just like now. But you're not giving now a chance. You're not giving today the same grace you gave yesterday. You're not letting it grow into something beautiful because you've already decided it can't be, but it can, if you let it. You don't need to forget the past. You don't need to hate it. You just need to stop putting it on a pedestal so high that nothing in your life now can ever reach it. Let it be what it was, real, imperfect, meaningful, but not better than what's possible now. Not the peak of your story, just a part of it. And here's the final paradox. The moment you stop chasing the past, you start creating a future that could actually feel as good as you imagine the past did. Not because you're forcing it, but because you're present for it. You're not watching your life from the rearview mirror anymore. You're back in the driver's seat, and this time, you get to decide where it goes. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the approval addiction, needing external validation so badly that your entire identity becomes shaped by what others think. You just want to be liked. You want to be accepted, seen, heard. You want to know that you matter, that who you are is enough. So you smile when you're tired. You agree when you don't. You shrink when you want to speak. You stretch when you want to rest. You bend, twist, edit, and adjust, all so they'll approve. And for a moment, it works. You get the nod, the like, the compliment, but it fades fast. And then you need more. Here's the paradox. You chase approval to feel more like yourself. But the more approval you chase, the further you drift from who you actually are. You build an identity out of mirrors, reflecting back what others want to see. You shape your voice to fit their ears. You measure your worth by reactions. But a life built on other people's opinions has no solid ground. One wrong look, one missed text, one quiet room, and you collapse. You think being liked means being safe, that the more people accept you, the more secure you'll feel. But the more approval you gather, the more afraid you become of losing it. You become a performer in your own life, and now every moment is an audition. Every interaction is a test. Every silence feels like rejection. You're not living. You're managing perceptions. You say you want to be authentic, but you're terrified of what authenticity might cost. So you hide your edges, you soften your opinions, you mute your needs, and then you wonder why you feel so unknown, even when you're surrounded by people. But they don't know you. They know the version of you built for applause. And here's the strange twist. Even when you get approval, it doesn't land. It feels shallow. It slips right through. Because deep down, you know it wasn't for the real you. It was for the version you put on display. So the praise feels disconnected. You smile on the outside, but inside you ask, would they still love me if they saw everything? And that question keeps you performing. You think fitting in will lead to connection, but connection doesn't come from being accepted, it comes from being understood. And you can't be understood if you're always adjusting. You think you're blending in, but you're fading out. You become invisible inside your own effort to be visible. You lose your voice trying to make it louder for someone else. You want to be chosen, but you never stop to ask if you're choosing yourself. You give away your time, your energy, your truth, hoping someone else will return it in the form of validation. But they can't. Because the hole you're trying to fill is internal. No amount of outside approval can fix what your own voice forgot to say, that you are enough even without applause. You fear judgment, so you avoid risk. You say what you're supposed to say. You do what's expected. But the more you play the role, the less joy you feel. You smile in the mirror, but don't recognize the person behind it, because approval requires you to wear a mask, and wearing it too long makes you forget what your face looks like. And the cruelest part, when you do start to show your real self, when you speak your truth or make a different choice, the approval drops. People pull back. They notice the change. Some don't like it, and it hurts, not because it means you're wrong, but because it proves your fear was true, that some people only like the version of you that wasn't real, and now you're left wondering if you'll ever be loved without pretending. You think approval means love, but approval is conditional. It's based on performance. Love, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't require a script. It holds space for the messy, the flawed, the growing. But you can't find that kind of love if you're busy managing impressions. You have to risk being disliked to be truly loved. You keep asking others to tell you who you are, but no one else can answer that. Not really. And every time you hand someone that power, you lose more of yourself. You ask, "Do you like me?" when the real question is, "Do I even like who I've become to be liked?" And here's the sharpest edge. The more approval you get, the more you need it. It becomes a drug, a fix. One compliment leads to craving 10 more. One silent room feels like punishment. One disagreement feels like exile. You become hyper-aware, always reading the room, always checking reactions. You don't rest, you manage, and it's exhausting. You thought chasing approval would make you feel full, but it leaves you starving, because it's never enough. You build your house on applause, but it shakes with every whisper of disapproval. You don't need more praise. You need permission. Permission to be who you are, even when it's not what others expect. You believe that validation will finally make you feel real, but you've been real the whole time, even under the performance, even under the fear, even when no one clapped. The challenge isn't becoming worthy, it's remembering you always were. And the final paradox, when you stop needing approval, you actually start attracting it. But not because you're trying, because people can feel when someone is free, when someone is honest, when someone has come home to themselves. That's the kind of presence that draws others in. Not the polished version, not the perfect answer, just the truth. You don't need everyone to approve of you. You just need to stop abandoning yourself to gain their attention. You don't need louder applause. You need your own voice, the one that says, "I'm still worthy even if they don't see it." Because the most powerful approval doesn't come from out there. It starts here, quiet, steady, yours. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is fearing missing out, obsessing over every opportunity you didn't take, believing life is always better elsewhere. You want to feel alive. You want to know you're making the most of everything, that no moment is being wasted. So you scroll, you watch, you listen, and suddenly everywhere you look, someone is doing something amazing. They're going places, meeting people, chasing dreams. And you're just sitting there, watching it all happen without you. The more you look, the more it seems like everyone else is in the right place, at the right time, living the right life, and you're not. Here's the paradox. The more you fear missing out, the more life you actually miss. Not because you're not invited, but because your attention is never here. You could be in a good moment, even a beautiful one, but your mind is somewhere else, comparing, longing, wondering what else is out there. You think you're searching for connection, but you end up disconnecting from where you are. Not because the moment isn't enough, but because you believe somewhere else must be better. You thought keeping your options open would bring freedom, but it brings anxiety because now you're afraid of choosing wrong. You hesitate, you second guess, you say yes to everything and enjoy nothing. You show up physically, but mentally you're checking what you might have missed. You think you're maximizing your life, but you're scattering it. You're everywhere and nowhere at the same time. You believe that every missed chance is a loss, that not being at that party, not joining that trip, not saying yes to that offer means you're falling behind. So you run from moment to moment, chasing the next best thing, never fully arriving in any of them. The fear that something better is happening becomes louder than the life that's already happening. And here's the strange part. The more you see, the more you feel left out. Even when you're included, even when your own life is full, because someone else is always doing more. Something else is always going on, and the highlights never stop. The celebrations, the wins, the pictures. You consume all of it and forget it's only a fraction of the truth. You believe the version you're shown and assume you're the only one feeling this way. But most people feel like they're missing something too, even while they're showing you the best parts of their lives. You think this fear is pushing you toward experience, but it's pulling you away from presence. You're so busy chasing what could be that you forget to feel what is. You think you're missing out on life, but it's your own fear that's keeping you from it. Because the more you focus on what's missing, the more blind you become to what's here. You say yes to everything, so you won't feel left out. But now you're stretched thin. You're overwhelmed. And still, you're not satisfied. You think doing more will fix the feeling. But doing more without presence only leaves you emptier. Because no experience can fulfill you if you're not really in it. You don't need more moments. You need to be in the ones you already have. You think that happiness is happening somewhere else, that peace is over there, that meaning is attached to a different city, a different person, a different timeline. But the mind always imagines the other side as brighter. You dream of it while standing in your own garden, forgetting to water it because you're too busy watching someone else's grow. And by the time you look back at your own life, it feels dry, faded, small. Not because it is, but because you abandoned it. And here's the most painful twist. Even when you do get what you thought you were missing, it rarely feels the way you imagined. The event you craved wasn't that exciting. The opportunity you obsessed over wasn't that fulfilling. The place you wanted to be didn't bring the peace you expected. And then you wonder, why didn't it fix the feeling? Because the feeling wasn't about the moment. It was about your focus. And wherever your focus goes, your emotions follow. You thought you were chasing experiences, but you were chasing escape. Escape from the feeling that you're not enough where you are, that your life, as it stands, isn't measuring up, but no amount of chasing can fill a gap created by self-abandonment. You keep thinking something out there will complete you, but real peace comes when you finally look around and decide that what you have, this hour, this space, this connection, is not a consolation prize. You fear missing out, but you never ask what you're missing out on by fearing. You miss slow mornings, quiet joys, deep talks, full breaths. You miss the comfort of doing nothing, because nothing feels dangerous in a world that never stops moving. But not every moment has to be packed with more. Some moments are meant to just be lived, simply, without comparison, without noise. And the deeper paradox, The people you think are living the life you're missing are probably looking at you the same way, wondering if they're doing enough, if they're in the right place, if they made the right choice. You all believe you're on the outside of something better, and in that belief, you never settle into your own life. You keep searching for the perfect experience, but perfection doesn't exist. Every opportunity comes with trade-offs. Every path means letting go of another, and trying to hold them all at once only leads to emptiness. You thought more options meant more freedom, but too many choices can leave you paralyzed. You fear the doors you didn't walk through, but forget to appreciate the one you're in. And here's the quiet truth. Contentment isn't loud. It won't compete for your attention. It sits quietly, waiting to be noticed. It doesn't shout like excitement. It doesn't sparkle like comparison, but it stays. It's in the unnoticed seconds, the spaces between the big things, the feeling of being okay even when nothing thrilling is happening. You don't need to be everywhere. You don't need to do everything. You just need to show up for your own life, fully, honestly, completely. Because the moment you stop fearing what you might be missing, you start finding what you've been missing all along. Not out there, but right here. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is catastrophizing the future, turning minor uncertainties into full-blown disasters in your mind before they even happen. You're just trying to be prepared. That's how it starts. A small worry, a question, a flicker of doubt, and then your brain takes over. Suddenly, a missed text means they're angry. A cough means something serious. A small mistake becomes the end of everything. You think you're solving problems, but you're really writing horror stories with no ending, not with facts, but with fear dressed up as logic. Here's the paradox. The more you try to protect yourself from what might go wrong, the more you suffer, even if nothing ever does. You feel the weight of things that haven't happened. You react to scenarios that only exist in your head. Your heart races, your chest tightens, your mind spins. Not because danger is near, but because you imagined it with such detail that your body believed it was real. You think this kind of thinking makes you smart, cautious, responsible, but it steals your peace. You live in defense mode, always alert, always scanning, always bracing for the next bad thing. You don't relax. You prepare for everything, all the time. And while nothing's actually wrong, you never feel right either. You say, I just like to be ready, but ready becomes rigid. You plan for every possible failure, but you don't know how to handle peace. When things are calm, you assume it's temporary. You wait for the next wave to crash. You can't enjoy good moments because your brain whispers, don't get too comfortable, and so joy becomes a warning, not a reward. You thought imagining the worst would give you control, but it gives you fear. You're not more prepared, you're more panicked. You spend hours rehearsing disasters that never happen, and even if one of them does, it never plays out exactly how you imagined, because life doesn't follow scripts. It just moves. But your mind is stuck, looping through what-ifs like they're facts. You think you're being realistic, but you're not seeing the future. You're predicting pain. And the more you predict it, the more it feels inevitable. You expect bad things, and then you live like they've already happened. You carry stress for events that never arrive. You feel sadness for losses that haven't occurred. You suffer from shadows. And the strangest twist, when something does go wrong, it's almost a relief. Not because you wanted it, but because the waiting is finally over. The storm you imagined came true, and now you can stop anticipating it. You feel more calm in chaos than in stillness, because uncertainty is harder to hold than fear. Fear at least gives you something to do. You don't just react to the present, you time travel. You live in tomorrows that never arrive. You forget today while trying to control a future you don't even trust. You miss sleep, you miss moments, you miss people. Not because they're gone, but because your mind is somewhere else, solving problems that don't exist yet. And you don't keep this to yourself. You over-prepare. You warn others. You try to manage every variable, but life doesn't care about your spreadsheets. It unfolds its own way. And when it doesn't match your fears, you're confused, not relieved, because the danger felt so real in your mind. And now you don't know what to believe, your reality or your thoughts. You're not doing this because you're weak. You do it because you care, because you want things to go well, because you want to avoid pain. But the method is flawed. You think that imagining disaster means you're ready for it, but you're never really ready, just tired, drained, empty from carrying futures that weren't yours to hold. And the cruelest part, this kind of thinking teaches you to expect disappointment. So when good things happen, you question them. You think, this won't last. You wait for it to fall apart. You convince yourself it's too good to be true. So even when life hands you joy, you reject it before it has the chance to settle in. You defend yourself against happiness as if it were a threat. You want certainty, but certainty doesn't exist. You want safety, but perfect safety isn't real. So instead of accepting that, you build stories, scenarios, outcomes, none of which make you safer, just more scared. The future becomes a place of dread, not possibility. And you forget that it hasn't even happened yet. You keep looking for the flaw, the hidden trap, the sign that something's about to break. You study people's words for hidden meanings. You analyze looks, tones, pauses. You overread every moment like it's a secret code, but most of the time, there is no code, just life, simple, messy, unpredictable, and often far kinder than your mind allows. You want to feel calm, but your brain has been trained to look for problems. Even when nothing's wrong, it says, there must be something. So peace feels suspicious. Rest feels reckless. You've confused alertness with wisdom. But true wisdom isn't about panic. It's about presence, knowing when to act and when to breathe. And that's the final paradox. The future you fear loses its power the moment you stop trying to control it. The moment you say, maybe it'll be okay, maybe I'll handle it if it's not. That's when peace returns, not through perfection, not through prediction, but through permission to live in the unknown and trust yourself anyway. You don't need to solve everything before it happens. You don't need to write scripts for storms that might never come. You just need to come back to now, to this breath, to this step, because most of what you're afraid of lives only in your imagination. And life is happening here, not in your fear, not in your what-ifs, but in your now. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is binary thinking, believing things are either all good or all bad, with no middle ground or nuance. It feels clean, it feels sharp, it feels easier. Something happens and you label it fast. This is right, this is wrong. This person is safe, that one is toxic. That decision was a total win or a complete failure. You don't want to deal with the mess in between, so you split the world into two categories, good or bad, love or hate, success or ruin. But the more certain you feel, the less truth you actually see. Here's the paradox. By trying to make life simpler, you make it harder. Because life isn't black and white, it's made of every shade in between. But when you force it into extremes, you lose the details, the context, the quiet truth hiding in the middle. You think you're being clear, but you're just cutting out everything that doesn't fit your label. You believe people must be all one thing. If someone disappoints you, they're suddenly awful. If they impress you, they're suddenly perfect. But no one is just one thing. We're all contradictions. We say smart things and make dumb choices. We care deeply and still hurt each other. But binary thinking doesn't leave room for that. It says, pick a side. And once you do, You stop seeing the full picture. You think this kind of thinking helps you make better decisions, but it traps you, because once you label something bad, you avoid it completely, even if it had something valuable in it. And once you label something good, you ignore the warning signs, even if they're flashing right in front of you. You give all your trust or none, all your hope or none, all your energy or none. And that leads to extremes, either clinging too tight or walking away too fast. You're looking for certainty, for clarity, for safety. You want the world to make sense, but the world isn't simple, it's layered. And when you flatten it into two sides, you don't understand it better. You just misunderstand it faster. You're not seeing what's real. You're seeing what your categories allow. And the strange twist, binary thinking doesn't bring peace. It brings tension, because nothing fits perfectly. You feel it when you try to explain something that doesn't make sense in your all or nothing system. You struggle to hold emotions that don't match the box you place them in. You say, "This person hurt me, but I still care about them." And your brain screams, "That doesn't compute." But that's how humans work. We live in gray areas. You want to believe your choices were either right or wrong, that your past was either a lesson or a waste. But most of the time, it's both. You learned and you lost. You grew and you hurt. You did your best and still got it wrong. Life isn't a clean record. It's a messy story. And the moment you try to make it neat, you erase the very things that make it real. You think saying something is bad gives you power over it, but it blinds you. You don't look deeper. You don't ask questions. You don't explore why it happened or what it meant. You just stamp it, reject it, and move on. But the pain stays. The confusion stays, because you skip the middle, and that's where healing happens. The same thing happens with success. If something doesn't go perfectly, you call it a failure. You ignore all the progress because it didn't meet your exact standard. But sometimes things are mostly good. Sometimes progress is slow. Sometimes the win looks different than expected. But binary thinking doesn't allow that. It only sees perfect or worthless. And that kind of judgment turns small steps into self-blame. You try to apply this thinking to yourself. You tell yourself you're either doing well or falling apart. You're either lovable or broken. And depending on the day, you swing from pride to shame. But you're not one or the other. You're a mix of strength and struggle. You're growing and stumbling at the same time. There's no single definition of who you are. And that's not weakness. That's being alive. The biggest paradox is this. Binary thinking feels like control, but it creates chaos because the world keeps showing you complexity and your system keeps rejecting it. So you're constantly frustrated, confused, angry that things don't fit into your rules. But it's not the world that's broken. It's the box you're trying to squeeze it into. You think nuance is messy, but it's actually freedom. It allows you to see more clearly, to love people without needing them to be perfect, to forgive without pretending nothing happened, to celebrate progress even when it's incomplete, to feel pain and still hold hope. Binary thinking says there are only two doors, but life is a hallway with hundreds of them. Some lead to mistakes that teach you. Some lead to love that surprises you. Some are half open, waiting for you to stop labeling everything long enough to explore. And that's where growth happens. In the exploring, in the not knowing, in the allowing. You don't have to understand everything instantly. You don't have to judge every experience before it's finished. You don't have to label every feeling as good or bad. You can let things unfold. You can let people be complicated. You can let yourself be in the middle without trying to race to a conclusion. And the final paradox, the more you resist the gray, the more you live in confusion. But the moment you accept it, everything softens. You stop needing life to be perfect. You stop needing answers that don't exist. You stop dividing the world into enemies and allies. You start seeing the full picture, the broken and the beautiful living side by side. It doesn't have to be either or. Sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's neither. Sometimes it just is. And that's enough. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is living for the highlight reel, measuring your life against the best moments of others you see online. Forgetting reality isn't a montage. It starts with a scroll, a glance, a quick moment where someone else's perfect second flashes across your screen. The vacation, the smile, the success, the sunset. You think, why don't I feel like that? And just like that, your day seems smaller. Your life feels dull. You compare your reality, messy, slow, uncertain, to their highlight, polished and edited. You know it's not the whole truth, but it still feels better than yours. And so, you shrink. Here's the paradox. You know the real isn't real, but you still use it as the measure of your worth. You say, that's just a moment. But your brain translates it into meaning. Their joy means your joy is missing. Their smile means your day is less bright. Their achievement makes your progress feel behind. Even when you don't want to compare, you still do. Not out of envy, out of fear. Fear that you're missing something. Fear that you're not enough. You think the problem is your life, but the problem is your focus. You stare at the best 5 seconds of someone else's month and wonder why your full day doesn't match it. But their reel is curated. Yours is lived. Their image is filtered. Yours is raw. They posted 1 second of laughter. You sat through hours of silence, of errands, of work, of doubt. But you forget that's all part of life too. Not less than. Just real. You want to feel inspired, but inspiration turns into insecurity when the real becomes the rule. You stop asking, what do I need? And start asking, what do they have that I don't? You change your pace. You question your path. You decorate your moments not to enjoy them, but to make them look like they belong in the scroll. Your memories become content. Your peace becomes performance. And here's the twist. You start building your own highlight reel. Not to celebrate life, but to prove you're keeping up. You post the smile, not the stress. You share the win, not the waiting. You filter the light, hide the tears, caption the pain with a quote. You hope people see it and say, wow, look at them. And maybe they do. But now they're measuring themselves against your filtered moment, the same way you measured yourself against theirs. So the cycle grows. You think more likes will mean more value. But the more you get, the more you need. Because it's not really about the photo. It's about the fear that you're being left behind, that someone else is living a better version of the life you want. You don't want their moment. You want what you believe it means. Confidence, fulfillment, love, but those things don't live in pictures. They live in presence. And the cruelest part, the more you chase the highlight, the less you feel real. You live in snapshots. You wait for moments worth sharing, not worth experiencing. You measure a day by how it looks, not how it feels. You forget how to enjoy something unless it can be proven to others. You lose the quiet joys because you're chasing the loud ones. You thought you were documenting memories, but you were editing your life. And now when you look back, you don't remember the truth. You remember the version you posted, the one that got the comments, the one that looked clean, even if it felt complicated. You erased the depth. You kept the shine. And the deeper paradox, the more connected you are online, the more isolated you feel offline. You know what everyone's doing, but you don't feel part of it. You see it all, but experience less. You scroll for connection, but end up lonelier. Because real connection doesn't come from pictures. It comes from being where you are, fully, even when it's boring, even when it's messy. You forget that real life is slow. It's made of dishes and traffic and waiting rooms. It's made of awkward silences and small talks and ordinary mornings. It's not exciting all the time. It's not perfect angles and golden hours. And it's not supposed to be. Life happens in the in-between. But you're chasing moments that feel cinematic and judging yourself for not living in a movie. You thought the real would motivate you, but it turned into pressure, a silent weight, a quiet voice saying, "You should be doing more. You should be happier. You should be like them." And now, even when you rest, you feel guilty. Even when you're doing well, it doesn't feel like enough, because you're not comparing your life to a real standard. You're comparing it to a highlight. And still, you keep scrolling. Not because you want to feel bad, but because you want to feel something. You're looking for joy, for beauty, for proof that life can be magical. But the irony is, that magic already exists, just not in the way the screen shows it. It exists in unfiltered moments, in laughter with no camera, in tears that don't need to be explained, in silence that doesn't need to be filled. You don't need a better-looking life. You need a better feeling one. One where you stop judging yourself by snapshots and start noticing the full story. The quiet growth, the real friendships, the mornings that start slow, the progress no one sees, the courage it takes to live without always needing proof. And the final paradox, the moment you stop living for the highlight reel, your life starts to feel more alive. Not because it suddenly looks better, but because it finally feels honest, whole, yours, not curated, not posted, not measured, just lived. And that kind of life doesn't need likes. It just needs you, present, breathing, being, where the real ends and reality begins. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is perfection paralysis. Waiting until conditions are perfect before starting, which means never actually starting. You tell yourself you just want to get it right. That's all. You want to be ready. You want things to line up, the timing, the tools, the confidence, the clarity. You say, not now, but soon. And soon becomes someday, and someday becomes never. Not because you don't care, not because you're lazy, but because you've convinced yourself that doing it wrong is worse than not doing it at all. Here's the paradox. By waiting for the perfect moment, you miss every real one. You stay stuck, not because you can't begin, but because you think beginning without perfection is failure. You believe your first try should look like someone else's final product. You think effort only matters when it's flawless, so you delay, you tweak, you plan endlessly, but planning without action becomes fear in disguise. You say you're being patient, careful, smart, but what you're really doing is hiding behind the idea that more time equals better results. But more time without motion just makes the fear grow stronger. You rehearse the thing in your mind over and over until it becomes too big, too heavy, too risky. You don't avoid the task. You build a wall around it and call it preparation. You want it to be good. That's natural, but perfection is not a standard. It's a trap. It keeps moving. The more you chase it, the further it gets. You write a sentence and delete it. You make a plan and toss it. You wait for the spark, the sign, the certainty, but nothing ever feels like enough. And still, the idea stays with you, untouched, unrealized, stuck in a folder labeled later. You think waiting makes you wise, but waiting too long becomes a form of surrender, not to doubt, but to illusion. The illusion that there's a perfect version of you who will show up someday, fully ready, fearless, flawless. But that version never arrives. Only the version of you who's willing to be messy, wrong, and imperfect has the power to create anything real. And here's the cruel twist. The more pressure you put on the outcome, the harder it becomes to begin. Because now it's not just a task, it's a test of your worth, your identity, your value. You say, if I do this, it has to be amazing. But amazing comes later. It comes from the doing, not the waiting. You don't get skill from standing still. You get it from starting badly and staying in the game. You look at others who are doing the thing and you think they must have started perfectly, but they didn't. They started unsure, clumsy, unready, and they kept going. But you only see the polished version. You compare your invisible first try to their visible hundredth. You call it logic, but it's judgment. You give yourself rules that no one else had to follow. You think perfection will protect you, that if it's flawless, no one can criticize it. But the truth is, perfection doesn't silence judgment. It just delays exposure. You fear being seen before it's ready, but being seen is the only way it gets better. The only way to grow is to go, to stumble, to try, to face the thing instead of perfecting the idea of it forever. You don't realize how much life you've put on hold while waiting for things to feel just right. The book you haven't written, the conversation you haven't had, the move you keep pushing back, the idea that stays in your mind, untouched because you're afraid it won't be good enough. But nothing becomes good until you give it room to be bad first. You think you're avoiding failure, but not starting is its own kind of failure. A quiet one, a hidden one, a version that looks safe but leaves you restless. Because deep down, you know it could have been something, but you never let it be anything, and now you call it timing, but timing was never the problem. Fear was. You say you're waiting for motivation, but motivation follows motion, not the other way around. You think starting should feel easy, but sometimes the door only opens when you knock first, and sometimes the knock is shaky, uneven, hesitant. But it counts. It always counts. You want conditions to line up, but conditions are never perfect. There will always be noise, doubt, distraction, fatigue. The world never clears the runway for you. You take off anyway, and sometimes the flight is rough. But the view is worth it, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. You tell yourself that quality matters. That's true, but you can't improve what you haven't begun. Quality comes from quantity, from doing, redoing, adjusting, learning. But you've made the first step so big that it looks impossible. You've made perfect the requirement for starting, when starting is what creates the chance for perfect to even exist. You call yourself unprepared, but you've been preparing for years. You've watched, learned, thought deeply. You're not missing ability. You're missing permission. The permission to start without knowing everything, to move without a guarantee, to try without a polished plan. And the paradox breaks here, when you finally begin. Not with certainty, not with mastery, just with the courage to let it be what it is. Flawed, incomplete, alive. You don't need a perfect beginning. You just need a real one. The kind that feels shaky in your chest but honest in your soul. Because the moment you start, perfection loses its power. It fades. And now you're just doing, breathing, making, being. You're not waiting for your best. You're building toward it. And it starts now. Not someday. Not when the stars align. Not when everything feels safe. Now, where it's messy, where it's real, where it finally begins. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the identity trap, letting labels, introvert, failure, anxious, etc., define you completely, leaving no room for growth. You're just trying to understand yourself. That's where it starts. You want clarity, a way to make sense of your feelings, your struggles, your patterns. So you find a word, a label, and at first, it helps. It explains things. It gives you language. It feels like truth. You say, I'm just wired this way. That's who I am. This is what I've always been. And slowly, that explanation becomes a boundary, a wall, a place you stay inside even after you've outgrown it. Here's the paradox. The more you use labels to understand yourself, the more you use them to limit yourself. You think you're finding your identity, but you're building a cage. You forget that the label was supposed to be a starting point, not a stopping one. A description, not a definition. But now it feels permanent, fixed, like nothing beyond it is allowed. You say you're an introvert, so you avoid people. You say you're anxious, so you never take the leap. You say you're a failure, so you stop trying. You turn a tendency into a rule, a moment into a map. You think you're being honest, but you're really building a ceiling. You lock yourself inside a word that was never meant to hold your entire story. You believe you're protecting yourself, that embracing the label will bring you peace, and maybe at first it does. You finally feel seen. You finally feel understood. But then you stop moving. You stop questioning. You stop wondering who else you could become. You say, "This is just who I am." But who you are is still being written, and you've paused the writing too soon. You think certainty is safety, but identity built on certainty becomes fragile, because the moment something challenges that label, when you act differently, feel differently, grow differently, you panic. You feel lost. You think something's wrong, but nothing's wrong. You're just changing, and change feels threatening when your sense of self is too narrow. You look back at your past and say, "This is how I've always been," but you forget all the versions of yourself you've already left behind. You weren't always this way, and you won't always be, but the more you cling to the label, the more you resist becoming someone else, even when that someone else feels more true. You thought calling yourself something would give you power, but now the label is in charge. It tells you what you can't do, who you can't be, where you don't belong. You follow its rules like they're written in stone. You explain away every opportunity by saying, "That's not me." But how would you know? You never gave yourself a chance to find out. You confuse honesty with limitation. You say, "I'm being real about who I am." But real doesn't mean rigid. Real means curious. It means evolving. You're not supposed to stay the same. You're supposed to stretch, shift, surprise yourself. And labels don't like surprises. They like predictability. But you are not predictable. You are possibility, unfolding. You wear your identity like armor. It protects you, but it also weighs you down. You use it to explain why you're stuck instead of using it to understand how to move forward. You say, "I've always been like this," but maybe that's only because you keep telling yourself the same story. And here's the strange part. The label might be true, but only partly. You might be introverted, but that doesn't mean you hate people. You might feel anxious, but that doesn't mean you're broken. You might have failed, but that doesn't mean you are a failure. The problem isn't the word. It's the way you hold it, like it's all of you, like it's final. You stop asking deeper questions. You stop exploring edges. You stop trying new things that might prove the label wrong, because proving it wrong feels like betrayal. But it's not. It's growth. It's you stepping out of a shell that used to fit, but doesn't anymore. You think shedding a label means losing yourself, but maybe it means finding more of yourself. Maybe it means saying, "This is part of me, but not the whole." Maybe it means allowing space for contradiction, for change, for chapters that look nothing like the last. The world tells you to define yourself quickly, to pick a lane, to know who you are and stay consistent. But growth isn't consistent. Healing isn't consistent. You can be quiet one year and bold the next. You can be unsure today and confident tomorrow. You're not lying when you change, you're living. You keep trying to prove your identity to others. You stay inside the box because it's what they expect. You don't want to confuse them. You don't want to confuse yourself. But clarity isn't found in staying still. It's found in movement. You don't find out who you are by repeating the same patterns. You find out by taking risks, even the risk of being wrong about yourself. And here's the twist. Even your deepest traits can shift. Even your core can soften or strengthen. Your story can evolve without erasing your truth. You are not betraying your past when you become something more. You are honoring it by using it as a foundation, not a prison. You don't have to drop every label, but you don't have to obey them either. You can hold them loosely. You can say, "This fits me right now," and still leave room for the next version. You can be both familiar and new, both known and surprising, both growing and grounded. The final paradox: the moment you stop needing the label to define you, you start becoming more of who you really are, not less defined, more alive, not boxed in, wide open. You stop being a sentence and become a story again, a moving one, an honest one that doesn't need a label to be valid, because you were never meant to be summed up. You were meant to be discovered again and again. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the "I don't deserve better" belief, settling for toxic environments because you believe deep down that it's all you're worth. You stay. That's the first thing. You stay even though it hurts. You stay even though it drains you. You tell yourself it's not that bad, that maybe it's normal, that maybe you're just too sensitive. You shrink your expectations and expand your tolerance, and you keep calling it loyalty, patience, strength, but really, it's a quiet belief whispering, "This is what you get." Here's the paradox. The worse you're treated, the more convinced you become that you deserve it. You think the pain is proof that you're not good enough, that something must be wrong with you. Because why else would it feel this heavy? Why else would love come with fear? Why else would peace feel so far away? You assume the world is just reflecting who you are, not realizing it's only reflecting what you're willing to accept. You tell yourself better doesn't exist, or if it does, it's for other people. People with more confidence, more beauty, more luck. You think of happiness like it's a currency you never earned. So you stop reaching, you stop asking, you stop imagining anything different, because imagining something better feels painful when you've already convinced yourself you'll never have it. You settle, not because you want to, but because you believe you have to. You accept less, you excuse the disrespect, you rationalize the chaos, and you stay quiet, thinking that maybe silence will protect you. But silence doesn't protect you, it traps you, and the longer you stay, the more normal it feels, the more right it seems. You confuse comfort with worth, but comfort isn't always safe. Sometimes it's just familiar pain. And the strange part is, if someone else were in your shoes, you'd tell them to walk away. You'd say, "You deserve more." But when it's you, the voice changes. It says, "You're lucky to have anything at all." You think calling it better than nothing makes it okay. But not everything is better than nothing. Some things steal more than they give. You stop dreaming, not because you're lazy, but because dreaming makes you ache. It shows you what you're missing. It shows you the gap between what you feel and what you've settled for. So you bury the dream. You pretend it never mattered. You call it unrealistic, but it still lives inside you, quietly asking, "What if?" You think settling is survival, that it's what strong people do, that it's noble to endure, but there's nothing noble about self-neglect. There's nothing brave about dimming your light just to be tolerated. You weren't meant to be tolerated. You were meant to be seen, known, loved, fully and without condition. But you've rewritten that truth into something smaller, something painful, something you call normal. You look for signs to prove you're not worth more, and you always find them, because the mind sees what it believes. And if you believe you're not worthy, every cold glance feels like proof. Every missed call feels like confirmation. You don't question the environment. You question yourself. You don't ask, "Why are they treating me like this?" You ask, "What did I do to deserve it?" You learn to make excuses for others while blaming yourself. You learn to carry the weight of things you didn't break. You apologize first. You forgive without change. You beg for crumbs, and call it a feast. Not because you don't see the truth, but because you've been trained to believe that asking for more is asking for too much. You remember every flaw, every mistake, every failure. You keep them close, like armor, and then you use them against yourself. You say, "See? This is why no one stays. This is why I end up here. This is why I can't ask for more." But those moments weren't reasons to stay small. They were reasons to grow. They weren't signs that you're broken. They were signs that you're human. And here's the cruel twist. The longer you stay in places that devalue you, the harder it becomes to imagine anything else. You adapt to the toxicity. You normalize it. You start calling dysfunction just how things are. And when something kind shows up, you flinch. You think it's fake. You reject it before it can reach you. Because now kindness feels foreign. Respect feels suspicious. Safety feels boring. You want better? You do. But wanting it feels dangerous. Because wanting something you don't believe you can have only deepens the pain. So you choose the pain you know, the predictable pain, the one you've rehearsed, and you tell yourself you're being realistic. But you're not. You're just repeating a pattern that was never yours to keep. You didn't choose this belief. It was given to you, slowly, quietly, by experiences, by people, by messages that taught you to expect less, to accept less. And now you carry it like it's your own. But it isn't. It's borrowed. It can be returned. It can be unlearned. And the paradox starts to break the moment you stop asking, "What am I allowed to want?" and start asking, "What do I deserve just for being me?" Not for performing, not for pleasing, not for fixing, just for existing. Because your worth doesn't depend on effort. It doesn't come from someone else's permission. It doesn't rise and fall with how others treat you. It's steady, constant, untouched by their limits. You don't have to stay where you are to prove anything. Not your strength, not your loyalty, not your resilience. You are allowed to leave what hurts. You are allowed to outgrow what once fit. You are allowed to believe in a future that doesn't match your past. And the final paradox, the moment you stop settling because you think it's all you're worth, you begin to rise. Not because something outside you changes, but because you finally see what was always true. That you were never meant to beg for peace. That you were never meant to shrink for love. That you were never meant to stay small in a life that's waiting for you to expand. You don't need to earn better, you just need to remember you already deserve it. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is rescuing others to avoid your own pain. Obsessing over fixing people as a distraction from your unresolved issues. You want to help. That's how it begins. You see someone hurting and your heart moves fast. You show up, you listen, you give advice, you offer your time, your energy, your peace. You call it love. You call it care. But underneath it, something else is happening. You're not just helping them, you're avoiding you. You're fixing others because facing your own pain feels harder. Here's the paradox. The more you try to rescue someone else, the more lost you become in your own life. You think their problems are urgent, but what's really urgent is your need to look away from your own wounds. You think healing them will bring you peace, but it just delays the moment you'll have to sit with yourself. You say you're strong for others, but you haven't let yourself be soft for you. You hold space for their emotions while stuffing down your own. You cheer them through their storms while pretending you're not drowning too. You think this makes you selfless, but sometimes it's just another way to run, to hide, to stay distracted. You don't even realize you're doing it. You say, "They need me," and maybe they do, but why do you need to be needed so badly? Why does their chaos feel more manageable than your silence? Why do you pour yourself into their healing while ignoring the place inside you that's still bleeding? You thought fixing others would make you feel whole, but it only makes you more empty. because you keep giving pieces of yourself away without stopping to check if you're okay. You offer solutions, advice, encouragement, but only outward, never inward. And when they get better, or move on, or stop needing you, you feel lost again. Not because they're gone, but because now you're left with what you tried so hard to avoid, your own pain. You think your purpose is to save people, but saving them has become your shield. If they're broken, you don't have to look at your own cracks. If they're falling apart, you don't have to admit that you are too. You call it compassion, but it's also control, because focusing on their mess gives you a reason to ignore your own. You don't give yourself the same grace. When they cry, you comfort. When you cry, you push it down. When they're confused, you reassure. When you're confused, you blame yourself. You show up for them in ways you never show up for you. And the truth is, you're exhausted. Not just from carrying others, but from abandoning yourself over and over again. You think helping is healing, but helping can become a hiding place, a mask, a role. You become the fixer, the caretaker, the reliable one. And eventually, you forget how to be anything else. You build your identity around being their strength, and in doing so, you lose touch with your own softness, your own needs, your own truth. And here's the strange twist. You often pick people who don't want to be fixed, who resist your help, who drain you instead of rising with you, because something about that dynamic feels familiar, safe even. You say, if I can fix them, maybe I'll finally feel okay. But you won't, because their healing isn't your healing. Their breakthrough doesn't erase your pain. It only distracts you from it. You want to be needed because being needed feels like love, but needing to be needed becomes a trap. It keeps you stuck in other people's problems, trying to prove your worth by solving things that were never yours to solve. And when they don't change, when they stay stuck, you take it personally. You feel like you failed, but it was never your job to save them. You say you're fine. You say you're just busy helping, but inside you feel lonely, misunderstood, worn down. You're surrounded by people, but none of them see the part of you that's falling apart quietly. Because you never show it. You stay strong, you stay focused, and you wonder why no one offers you what you give them. You think pain ignored will disappear, but it doesn't. It hides, it waits, it finds ways to speak, even when you won't listen. And sometimes it speaks through your obsession with others, through the way you fix, advise, carry, rescue. You say you're trying to help them heal, but maybe your help is a cry for your own healing. You're not wrong for caring. You're not wrong for showing up. But there's a difference between helping someone out of love and helping them to avoid yourself. One brings connection, the other brings avoidance dressed up as compassion. You say, I just want them to be okay. But what if that's because you don't know what to do when the focus turns inward? When no one needs you? When the room is quiet and it's just you with your thoughts? That's when the pain you've been avoiding starts to rise. And that's the moment you rush to help someone else. Not because they asked, but because you needed the escape. You want peace, but peace doesn't come from fixing others. It comes from facing yourself, from sitting with the discomfort, from asking the questions you've avoided, from feeling the things you've buried. And no one else can do that work for you, just like you can't do it for them. The final paradox: the more you try to rescue others to escape your pain, the more trapped you become in it. But the moment you stop running from yourself, the healing begins. Not all at once, not easily, but honestly, slowly, deeply, fully. You start to help others not from a place of escape, but from overflow, from strength rooted in truth, not in distraction. You don't have to be everyone's hero. You don't have to fix every broken thing. You don't have to carry what's not yours. You are allowed to pause, to look inward, to say, I need help too, because you matter even when you're not fixing anyone. You're still worthy even when you're not saving the day. And the moment you rescue yourself, not from pain, but from pretending you don't feel it, is the moment everything starts to change. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is mental time travel. Constantly living in the past or future, never fully grounded in the now. You're always somewhere else. That's the first thing. You're walking through today, but your mind is stuck in yesterday or already racing into tomorrow. You replay conversations, you rewrite choices, you rehearse future disasters, or build imaginary success. You call it thinking, you call it planning, but most of the time, it's escaping. You're not living the moment you're in. You're just near it, passing through like a ghost. Here's the paradox. The more time you spend in the past or the future, the more life you miss in the only place it actually happens, the present. You think visiting those places gives you answers, that if you just think enough about what went wrong or what might go wrong, you'll finally feel better. But you never do. You just loop, you circle, you overthink, and the now quietly slips away while your attention is somewhere it can't touch. You go back in your head and try to fix what already happened. You wonder how you could have done it better, how they could have responded differently, how things could have unfolded if you were just smarter, braver, quicker. You carry regret like it's a responsibility. You say you're learning from it, but really, you're punishing yourself with it. You can't change the past, but you keep acting like maybe, just maybe, one more thought will unlock a way to undo it. Then you jump to the future. You imagine the best, or usually the worst. You build scenarios. You predict pain. You prepare for things that haven't even shown up yet. You think this makes you prepared, but it makes you anxious, because the future isn't here, and trying to live in it early only fills you with fear about things you can't control. And the twist is, you're doing both at once, flipping between memory and fantasy, guilt and worry, past and future. You leave today behind and stretch yourself thin between two places that don't even exist anymore, or yet. And you wonder why you feel tired. You wonder why you feel disconnected. You wonder why you feel like time is speeding up, slipping through your hands. But time isn't the problem. Attention is. You want peace, but you search for it in places peace can't live. The past already happened. The future hasn't arrived. But your mind keeps knocking on both doors, hoping something behind them will make right now feel better. You miss real smiles, soft moments, small joys, because you're not present for them. You're stuck thinking about what they mean, or how long they'll last, or if they'll ever come again. You say, "I'm just being thoughtful," but thinking too much about anything that isn't happening right now turns into distance, and distance turns into emptiness. You can be surrounded by love, laughter, and light, and still feel like you're somewhere far away, because you are. Your body's here, but your mind is on a timeline that doesn't match. And here's the strange part. The more you try to mentally fix the past or plan the future, the more powerless you feel, because nothing ever feels certain, nothing ever feels finished. You can't get the apology you wanted. You can't control the outcome you're afraid of. You sit with the scenes in your mind and try to rewrite them or get ahead of them, but they never settle. They keep spinning, and the present becomes harder to feel, harder to trust, harder to want. You think you're gaining control, but you're losing presence. You think you're solving something, but you're just feeding a loop. The mind loves movement, but movement without arrival is just running. You run backward, then forward, then backward again, and the now waits patiently, holding everything you've been asking for, but you never look it in the eye. You tell yourself that you'll be present once things make sense, once the past doesn't hurt, once the future feels safe, but neither will ever be fully under control. There's always another memory to untangle, another worry to solve, another event to fear or plan or imagine. So you stay stuck in between, telling yourself, soon I'll live, soon I'll be here. But soon is just a story you tell to justify staying lost. And even when the future arrives, you're not there for it, because now you're thinking about what comes next. The joy fades fast. The peace is short, not because it isn't real, but because you won't let yourself live inside it. You treat every good moment like it's temporary, like it's something to prepare to lose, and by preparing to lose it, you never fully receive it. You want to feel alive, but you're only fully alive when you're fully here. And being here requires trust. Trust that this moment is enough, that it doesn't have to be perfect, that you don't have to solve your entire life before enjoying one simple breath. And the paradox breaks the moment you pause, really pause, when you feel the chair beneath you, the air in your lungs, the sound around you, when you let yourself be exactly where you are without trying to be anywhere else. That's not giving up. That's waking up. You're not your past. You're not your future. You're not the thoughts you keep spinning through. You're the one noticing them, and you have the power to return, again and again, to this second, this space, this now, because the present is the only place where you can change anything, the only place where peace can land, the only place where life actually feels like life, not a memory, not a maybe, but a heartbeat, a step, a chance. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is thinking success is linear, believing progress should be smooth, and when it's not, thinking you've failed entirely. You start something with hope. You imagine the path clearly. You'll move step by step, each one higher, each one cleaner, each one better than the last. You think it'll make sense. That progress will feel like rising, like climbing steadily with no stumbles. You think success is a straight road, and when it's not, when it curves, drops, or spins you in circles, you start to believe something's gone wrong, not with the path, but with you. Here's the paradox. The more you expect progress to be smooth, the more discouraged you feel when it isn't. You take one step forward and 2 steps back, and suddenly you forget the first step even happened. You don't see growth. You only see the fall. You forget that movement, even messy, is still movement. You forget that growth often hides inside setbacks. You think setbacks mean you're broken, but they often mean you're building. You think doubt means you're off course, but sometimes doubt is part of the course. You think pain means you're failing, but pain is often proof you're stretching. You want the path to be clear, but progress isn't a line. It's a storm, a climb, a collapse, a recovery. You compare your life to someone else's chapter 10 and wonder why your chapter 2 looks so chaotic. You measure your day by results and forget that most growth doesn't show up in numbers. It shows up in resilience, in the moment you wanted to quit but didn't, in the work you did that no one saw, in the effort that felt invisible but kept you going anyway. You try once, and if it doesn't work, you call it failure. You expect mastery before you've earned consistency. You forget that even those who seem like they've made it fell down 1,000 times. But you don't see their stumbles. You only see their highlight. So you expect your progress to match their perfection, and when it doesn't, you shrink. You start something new, full of energy. Then it gets hard. Then it gets boring. Then it gets uncertain. And you think, maybe this isn't for me. But that's just how it goes. The dip, the stall, the confusion. It's not a sign to stop. It's a sign that you're right on time, because every real journey looks wrong before it feels right. You look at the line on the graph and expect it to rise evenly, but the line never rises like that. It dips, it flattens, it spikes, it crashes, and through all that chaos, you're still growing. You're learning through mistakes, through restarts, through days that feel pointless but plant something deep. You want results, But growth starts slow. You don't see it until much later, like a seed in the ground. Nothing shows for a while, and then suddenly something breaks through. But that breakthrough didn't come from one perfect day. It came from the ones where you showed up even when it didn't feel worth it, especially then. You tell yourself if it were meant to be, it would be easy. But ease is not the test. Endurance is. Not everything great comes with flow. Sometimes the best things are built through resistance, doubt, and failure. You're waiting for a sign. But sometimes the sign is simply that you haven't quit. You think you need to go fast. But speed isn't success, direction is. And sometimes going slow is the best pace, because slow lets you learn, slow keeps you steady, slow lets the lessons sink in so the growth can last. But if you rush it, you miss the roots. You build something that looks strong but collapses at the first shake. You look at the past and judge yourself. You say, I should be further by now. But further compared to what? Compared to who? You're not late. You're just living a path that doesn't follow the rules you made up in your head. A path that twists because it's real, because you're human, because nothing worth keeping is ever built in a straight line. You get discouraged when you take a break, when you lose focus, when you fall back into old habits. You call it failure, but maybe it's part of it. Maybe falling off track is what teaches you how to return stronger. Maybe circling back is still part of the climb. Maybe pausing isn't the end. It's a breath before your next rise. You want progress to look like motion, but sometimes it looks like stillness, like reflection, like letting go. Sometimes the most important move is the one no one sees, the choice to rest, the decision to try again after failing 5 times, the quiet commitment to keep showing up even when you feel like nothing's happening. You think the journey should always feel good, but some days it feels like doubt, like fear, like questioning everything. You think those moments are wrong, but they are the proof that you care, that you're deep in it, that you're not skating on the surface, you're walking through the fire, and that's where transformation lives. You forget that progress includes pain, that growth includes mistakes, that success includes silence. You expect a straight climb, but success is made in circles, in detours, in breakdowns that become breakthroughs. You can't skip the struggle and expect to keep the strength. It's built in the mess, in the slow return, in the start over. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is emotional reasoning. I feel like a failure, so I must be one. Letting feelings define facts. You don't need proof, you just need a feeling. If it hurts, it must be true. If you feel lost, you must be broken. If you feel small, you must be worthless. Your emotions speak, and you take them as law. You don't question them. You don't look for evidence. You believe them without hesitation. And so a bad day becomes a bad life. A single mistake becomes your identity. You think you're being honest, but really, you're just letting pain do the talking. Here's the paradox. The more you rely on feelings to tell you what's real, the more disconnected from reality you become. Emotions are loud, they're persuasive, but they aren't facts. They're responses, reactions, temporary states of mind, but you turn them into permanent truths. You say, I feel unloved, so I must not matter. But maybe you're just lonely today. Maybe your heart's tired. Maybe your mind is spinning stories. But you call the feeling truth and let it lead. You wake up anxious, and instead of saying, this will pass, you say, something must be wrong with me. You feel insecure and think it means you're failing. You feel ashamed and believe you are shameful. You confuse emotion with evidence, but emotion is just weather. Real, yes, but it moves. It doesn't always match the sky you're standing under. You think you're being self-aware, but emotional reasoning doesn't come from clarity. It comes from fear. Fear that if you feel bad, it must mean something bad is true. You don't stop to ask where the feeling came from. You don't explore what triggered it. You just accept it. And then you live under its shadow like it's a fact written in stone. You believe that if something feels off, it must be wrong. But not everything uncomfortable is dangerous. Not everything painful is final. Sometimes growth feels like discomfort. Sometimes love feels scary. Sometimes peace feels unfamiliar. But when you let emotion define fact, you reject anything that doesn't immediately feel good, even if it's exactly what you need. You think feelings are messages, and sometimes they are. But not every message is accurate. Some are echoes of old wounds, some are habits, some are lies you learned early and never questioned. You feel like you're not enough, but feeling it doesn't make it true. You feel like everyone is judging you, but they're probably too busy worrying about their own fears. And here's the strange part. The stronger the emotion, the more you believe it must be true. But strong emotions aren't proof. They're just loud. Pain screams, but that doesn't mean it's wise. Shame echoes, but that doesn't mean it's right. You feel overwhelmed and think you're weak. But maybe you're just human. Maybe your strength isn't in how you feel, but in how you keep going despite the feeling. You treat emotion like a mirror, but sometimes it's a funhouse mirror, distorted, exaggerated, reflecting not what's real, but what your mind believes when it's tired, stressed, afraid, or lonely. You think, I feel like a failure, but maybe what you really feel is disappointment, or pressure, or fear. You never stop to separate the emotion from the meaning. You just collapse them into one and carry the weight of both. You think logic and feeling can't exist together, but real wisdom is both. Emotion tells you something is happening. Thought tells you what to do with it. But when emotion takes over, you lose your ability to think clearly. You react instead of respond. You spiral instead of pause. You live in stories your mind creates in moments of pain, and you call those stories reality. You say, I feel like no one cares about me. But feelings aren't facts. Maybe someone does care. Maybe many people do. But the feeling blinds you to the truth. You say, I feel like I'm falling behind. But the only clock you're watching is the one comparison built. You say, I feel like I'm always messing things up. But always is a lie feelings tell when they're scared. You don't need to ignore your emotions, but you do need to question them, not with shame, but with curiosity. Where did this feeling come from? What else could it mean? What would I tell a friend who felt this way? Because the moment you start asking, you create space between what you feel and what you choose to believe. You want to trust yourself. That's good, but trusting yourself means knowing when your mind is not thinking clearly, when emotion is driving the car and logic is locked in the trunk. You don't need to push feelings away, but you also don't need to hand them the keys. Let them ride along, let them speak, but don't let them steer. And the cruel twist, the more you believe every emotion, the more emotions you start to fear. Because now, feeling bad means being bad. Feeling afraid means being doomed. Feeling off means being broken. You start to dread your own inner world, not because it's dangerous, but because you never learned to doubt it gently. You think feeling something deeply is the same as understanding it, but they're different. Feeling is experiencing. Understanding is reflecting, and reflection takes distance. It takes breathing room. It takes the courage to say, just because I feel this way doesn't mean it's the full truth. You don't have to fake positivity. You don't have to pretend everything's okay. You just have to stop treating every wave of emotion like a headline. Let it pass. Let it come. Let it teach you, not trap you. And the final paradox, the moment you stop believing that every feeling is truth, is the moment you start to feel more peace. Because now, you're grounded. You're steady. You're not swinging with every emotion. You're not collapsing under every wave. You're standing in the middle, noticing the storm, and choosing your next move with care. You're not your feelings. You're the one who feels. And that difference changes everything. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is the "if I try, I might fail" dilemma. Avoiding effort altogether to protect your ego from potential failure. You care, that's the truth underneath it. You care so much about the outcome that you pretend you don't. You act like it doesn't matter, but it does. You want it to work. You want to succeed. But the fear of failing pulls harder than the hope of winning. So instead of trying, you wait. You hold back. You tell yourself it's not the right time. Or maybe the idea wasn't that good. Or maybe you're just not ready yet. But deep down, you know it's something else. It's not about readiness. It's about fear. Here's the paradox. You avoid trying because you don't want to feel like a failure. But by not trying, you guarantee the exact thing you were afraid of. Nothing happens. No progress, no growth, no proof that you ever could have done it. You protect yourself from falling and end up standing still. You dodge the risk and lose the reward. You say, "If I don't give it everything, then at least I'll have an excuse." But that excuse becomes a wall that keeps you from everything you wanted to reach. You imagine trying and failing and how painful that would be. So instead of going all in, you go halfway. You stay comfortable. You don't commit fully, because then it won't hurt as much if it doesn't work. But the half effort leaves you stuck in between, not failing, but not succeeding either, not broken, but not growing. You think you're safe in that middle space, but it's not safe. It's heavy. It's hollow, and it's not where you're meant to stay. You don't call it fear. You call it logic. You say, "I'm just being careful." But being careful becomes a cage when it stops you from ever beginning. You want guarantees. You want certainty. But there's no growth in guaranteed outcomes. There's only repetition. And repetition feels safe, but it doesn't bring change. You say you're not ready, but maybe readiness only comes after the first step, not before it. You think failure would mean something about who you are, that if you try and it doesn't work, it proves you weren't good enough. So you protect your image, you protect your pride, you keep the idea alive by never testing it, because then you can still believe it could have worked if you had really tried, and that fantasy is easier to hold than facing a real result. But it's also the reason you never move forward. You admire people who take risks. You look at them and say, "They're brave," but you don't see their fear. You don't see how scared they were, how unsure they felt. You only see the action, and you tell yourself they're different, that they're fearless. But no one is fearless. Some people just act through fear. Others let fear decide for them, and that's the real difference. You fear embarrassment, rejection, falling short. You think failure would mean you are failure, but failure is feedback. It's direction, it's movement. It's what turns effort into experience. Without it, you don't grow. You just hover in the same loop, waiting, wondering, wishing. You avoid the pain of failure and accept the pain of regret. You tell yourself it's better not to try than to try and fall apart. But what if not trying is its own kind of falling? Quiet, slow, invisible from the outside, but deeply felt inside. You keep your hands in your pockets and call it peace, but it's not peace. It's delay. It's deferral. It's potential being buried while it's still alive. You think your fear will go away one day, that maybe if you wait long enough, you'll suddenly feel bold. But courage doesn't arrive like that. Courage is built in action, in risk, in falling and rising again. You don't become brave by thinking. You become brave by doing, scared. You say, "What if I try and it fails?" But also ask, "What if I try and it works?" What if the moment you let go of perfection, you find progress? What if the stumble leads to strength? What if the attempt opens doors that staying still never could? You won't know, because you've made comfort your priority, not change. And here's the sharp twist. The longer you wait, the heavier it feels to try. Because now you've built the idea up in your head. Now there's pressure. Now it feels like it has to be perfect. But the longer you wait, the harder it becomes to remember why you wanted it in the first place. The dream turns into dread. The possibility turns into fear. And still, you wait. You avoid trying because you think you're protecting yourself from failure. But really, you're protecting your fear, giving it power, feeding it every day you don't move. You're not staying still because it's safe. You're staying still because it's familiar. And familiar can feel like home, even when it hurts. You want change, but change doesn't come without risk, without effort, without the possibility that it might not work the first time, or the second, or the fifth. But each time you learn. Each time you build something: confidence, clarity, strength. Trying is the only way forward. There's no shortcut around the fear. There's only the way through it. And the final paradox: the moment you stop avoiding effort is the moment failure starts to lose its power. Because now, it's not about the outcome. It's about the honesty of showing up, the courage of trying, the freedom of knowing you gave your full self to something real. You stop measuring success by perfection and start measuring it by truth. You stop hiding. You start building. You stop rehearsing failure and start writing a new chapter. You try. You fall. You try again. And that becomes your strength. Not that you were perfect from the start, but that you weren't afraid to begin. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is negativity bias, giving far more weight to one criticism than to 10 compliments. You hear 10 good things and one bad thing, and the one bad thing is the one you carry. It echoes louder. It sticks deeper. It follows you home. Someone says you're kind, smart, talented, funny. Then someone says, "You're not enough," or "You messed up," or "You disappointed me." And suddenly, all the good things disappear, not because they're not true, but because your brain chooses to believe the worst. Here's the paradox. You are more likely to believe one painful voice than 10 loving ones. You think that criticism is the truth and praise is just kindness. You think the compliment is people being nice, but the insult is them being honest. You treat praise like decoration and criticism like proof. And so you trust the pain more than the love. You let the worst words define your value. You don't ask, "Why do I believe this one?" You ask, "Why didn't I see it sooner?" You believe the negative feedback must be accurate because it hurts so much. But pain doesn't always mean truth. Sometimes it just means you care. Sometimes it just means you're human. You treat discomfort like a fact. But sometimes discomfort is just your fear being touched, not your worth being questioned. You thought the 10 compliments would build you up, but you're only as secure as the last negative thing someone said. You let the one drop of poison ruin the whole glass. You throw away joy because one sentence didn't agree with it. You ignore kindness because one person didn't see you clearly. You give more weight to one wound than to 100 hands reaching to help. You think you're being realistic, but realism is not always negative. Truth isn't always harsh, yet you reject the good like it's fake and absorb the bad like it's permanent. Someone says something kind and you brush it off. You say, "They're just being nice." But someone says something sharp and you say, "They finally see the real me." You treat praise like it's suspicious and criticism like it's prophecy. You carry old words in your chest, things said to you years ago, words that still sting even though they were never meant to define you. You let them shape your identity, not because they're more valid, but because they're easier to believe. You let your mind gather every bad thing you've heard and stack it like evidence. Then you use that pile to argue against yourself. And the strange twist is, you think this keeps you humble. You think focusing on what's wrong will make you stronger. You say, I don't want to get a big head. But this isn't humility. This is self-erasure. This is shrinking in the face of love and expanding in the face of doubt. This is treating criticism like medicine and praise like sugar. You want to grow, so you pay attention to what's broken. But growth doesn't just come from pain. It also comes from love, from encouragement, from knowing what you're doing right. But you skip over that. You say, it's not enough. You ignore progress because you're addicted to proof that you're still behind. You think noticing the bad makes you more prepared, but it makes you more afraid. You anticipate rejection. You search for flaws. You listen harder when someone doubts you than when they believe in you. And the more you listen, the more it sounds like truth. Not because it is truth, but because it's the only voice you're giving full volume. You remember one person's criticism forever and forget the 100 people who clapped for you. You play that one sentence in your head over and over. You build an identity around it. You adjust your choices, your voice, your vision, all to avoid hearing it again. But what if it was wrong? What if it came from someone else's pain, not your failure? What if it didn't deserve the power you gave it? You say you just want to improve. That's fair. But you can't improve from constant self-attack. You can't evolve if you only see what's broken. You think that beating yourself up will lead to better results. But shame doesn't build growth. It builds fear. And fear makes you small, not strong. And the painful irony? When someone does say something good, you don't trust it. You think they're just being polite, or they don't know the real you. You find ways to discount their love because you've built a filter that only lets pain through. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're rejecting the exact thing you need most. You believe one negative comment outweighs 10 positive ones, but that only happens if you let it. The weight you give it is yours to choose. The volume of that voice is yours to control. Just because something hurt doesn't mean it gets to rule your mind. Not every opinion is a mirror. Not every insult is insight. Not every painful feeling is a final truth. You don't need to silence every critic. You just need to stop making them gods. They're just people, flawed, like you, and sometimes wrong and sometimes careless. You can listen, you can reflect, but you don't have to surrender. And the final paradox, the moment you stop believing that pain speaks louder than love, the world begins to sound different, softer, warmer. You start to hear the truth in the compliments. You start to let kindness sink in. You stop carrying that one sentence like it's your name. You begin to notice the people who see you fully, who don't just applaud your wins, but remind you of your worth when you lose. You begin to believe the things you once ignored, that you are capable, valuable, seen, and not because 10 people said it louder than one, but because you finally chose to listen. Welcome to the next paradox. This one is believing you're behind in life, measuring yourself against arbitrary timelines like marriage, wealth, or status. You wake up and feel like you're late, not late to anything specific, just late to life itself. Like you missed a bus no one told you was leaving. You scroll through people's updates, announcements, pictures. They're building families, buying homes, launching businesses. And you look at yourself and think, I should be further. You feel behind, not because something is wrong, but because someone else appears to be ahead. Here's the paradox. The more you measure your life against someone else's timeline, the more you lose track of your own. You start racing toward checkpoints that were never meant for you. You think life has a schedule, a calendar, a clock, and if you don't hit the milestones on time, you've failed. But time isn't a competition, and growth doesn't follow a script. You think you're behind, but behind what? Behind who? There's no universal pace, No master list, just pressure created by comparison. You take someone else's story, their highlight reel, and use it to judge your journey. You think their success means you're falling short. You think their joy means your time is running out. But clocks don't compare. Only people do. You say things like, I should have figured this out by now. I should already be married. I should have more money. But where did those expectations come from? Who wrote the rules? You never met the person who decided 30 is too late, or that success means a certain salary, or that love has to arrive by a certain age, but you still live by those rules, and they crush you. You forget that life unfolds differently for everyone. You forget that some people find their calling at 50. Some people fall in love at 60. Some people change paths at 40 and feel more alive than they ever did at 20. But you treat your journey like a race with fixed checkpoints. You think missing one means missing all. But life is not linear, and progress doesn't always look like arrival. Sometimes it looks like pausing. Sometimes it looks like starting over. You see friends getting promoted, getting engaged, moving abroad, and instead of feeling inspired, you feel like you're stuck, like everyone else got the map and you're wandering without direction. But they're wandering too. They just share the polished parts. You don't see their fear, their second-guessing, their quiet nights wondering if they're doing it right. You only see the celebrations, the achievements, the surface. So you compare your chaos to their curated moments and wonder why you don't feel like you're winning. You tell yourself you're not moving fast enough, but fast doesn't always mean right. Some people speed through life and miss the meaning. Some people move slowly and find depth. You think speed is progress. But sometimes rushing is just fear in disguise. You're not behind. You're just on a different road. And different doesn't mean late. It means yours. You think milestones are measurements, but they're not. They're moments. And moments come when they're ready, not when others expect them, not when social timelines say they should, but when life aligns, when growth prepares you, when the lesson lands. And sometimes, not reaching the milestone on time is what makes it meaningful when it finally arrives. You don't want to feel behind. You want to feel certain. You want to know you're doing okay, that you're not wasting time. But the more you chase certainty from the outside, the more uncertain you feel inside. You look for signs in everyone else's progress, but those signs weren't meant for you. You miss the clues in your own life because you're too busy watching theirs. You call it motivation, but sometimes it's just quiet panic. A sense that you are not enough because someone else achieved something you haven't. You turn their path into your pressure. You turn their timeline into your guilt. And you start running faster without asking where you're even going. But running fast in the wrong direction doesn't bring peace. It brings burnout. You think being behind is a fact, but it's a feeling. And feelings aren't always true. They come from thoughts. Thoughts shaped by culture, by stories, by comparison. If you never looked at someone else's life, would you still feel behind in yours? Or would you feel present? Would you feel curious? Would you feel more free? You think arriving late means missing out, but sometimes arriving late means arriving ready, arriving whole, arriving after learning everything you needed to learn along the way. You don't need to rush toward life. Life isn't leaving without you. It's waiting. It's unfolding. It's responding to the pace that's meant for you. You're not behind if you're still becoming. You're not late if you're still learning. You're not lost if you're still listening. Growth doesn't scream. It whispers. It nudges. It moves slowly, sometimes silently, and that's okay. The world wants loud results, but your soul wants quiet truth. And sometimes that truth only comes when you step off the timeline and walk at your own rhythm. You look for certainty in milestones, but certainty comes from alignment, from knowing what matters to you and building a life around it. And that kind of life doesn't need to match anyone else's. It doesn't need applause. It just needs honesty. Your honesty. Not about what you should have done by now, but about what still calls to you, what still lights you up, what still feels real. And the final paradox, the moment you stop trying to catch up is the moment you begin to feel like you're right on time. Because now, the timeline isn't running your life. You are. The pressure fades, the shame lifts, the path clears, and you realize you were never behind. You were just comparing your beginning to someone else's middle. You were just looking sideways when you needed to look within. Life isn't a race. It's a rhythm. And your rhythm is not too slow. It's just yours. The inversion reflex. This trap begins when you start noticing how often you do things just to avoid being manipulated. You second-guess praise. Was it genuine or a setup? You question criticism. Was it helpful or controlling? You hear advice and instantly invert it. What do they gain if I listen? This creates the inversion reflex. You begin rejecting anything that isn't your idea simply because it came from someone else. You feel clever, protected. No one can fool you if you never accept anything at face value. But then it deepens. You start doubting your own preferences. Did I really want this? Or did I just not want what they wanted? Eventually, you're not making choices. You're making anti-choices. Decisions driven by resistance, not desire. The trap is complete when the act of questioning becomes compulsive. Every interaction becomes a puzzle. Every compliment, a weapon. Every motive, suspect. You're not being manipulated anymore because you've become the manipulator, but of your own mind. The knowledge spiral. It begins innocently. You want to understand. A concept, a memory, a pattern. You read, you question, you dig deeper. And the deeper you go, the more complexity you uncover. Every answer creates 3 more questions. Every truth bends into contradiction. You realize there are layers beneath layers, and none of them are final. This is the knowledge spiral, the illusion that if you just learn a little more, it'll finally make sense. But it never does. You begin to realize that true understanding might be impossible, not because you're too limited, but because reality is too recursive. Think of trying to explain language, using language, or trying to see your own eye without a mirror. You study thought until you question the structure of thought itself. You analyze knowledge until knowledge dissolves into uncertainty. You chase truth until truth becomes fractal, beautiful, but unreachable. And by then, you're addicted. You need to keep climbing, but every step reveals the staircase is infinite. The anti-self hypothesis. What if the part of you that makes your decisions isn't on your side? This trap starts with small doubts. You make a choice, and afterward, you question it. Not just the outcome, but the intention. Did I sabotage myself? Did I pick this path because it's right, or because it's comfortable? The anti-self emerges when your inner voice splits into 2, the one that acts and the one that watches. And the one that watches doesn't trust the actor anymore. You start analyzing yourself like a stranger. Why did I say that? What am I avoiding? Am I pretending to care? The more self-aware you become, the more distant you feel from your own actions. You're not living. You're managing a puppet version of yourself, and every move it makes is suspect. Then comes the fatal twist. You begin to suspect that part of you wants you to fail, that your own habits were designed not to protect you, but to keep you small, that your routines, your rationalizations, even your ambitions are traps you built for yourself. And once you see your mind as an enemy hiding in your head, every thought becomes suspicious, including this one, the reverse spotlight. Imagine being on stage your entire life, but no one's watching you. This is the reverse spotlight, the illusion that people are thinking about you, judging you, reacting to your every move. But as you grow more self-aware, something darker settles in. You realize they weren't. You were always the center of your own stage, but to everyone else, you were just background noise. This flips your entire narrative. Every effort to impress, unnoticed. Every mistake you obsessed over, forgotten. Every performance, wasted on a non-existent audience. At first, it's liberating. You feel invisible, free, but then it sinks in. If no one's watching, what's the point? Your life becomes an echo chamber. You start replaying your moments, not to be admired, but to justify them. You become your own witness, your own critic, your own fan base, and your own ghost, and you can never go back. Once you truly grasp how little people notice you, you stop trying to be seen. But the tragedy isn't that no one was watching. It's that you performed anyway, and you still are.